Review and Scrutiny Committee. It's nice to see so many people in the chamber. My name is Marie-Therese Rossi. I'm the chair of the Scrutiny Committee, and this event is also being streamed live on YouTube, and members of the public and media can watch the meeting remotely. So I would like to welcome everyone who is also watching from YouTube, and then I think it would be appropriate for us to start with 72 seconds silence to remember those who lost their lives in the Grenfell tragedy. Thank you. I have apologies for absence from Adrian Beryl-Cox. Are there any declarations of interest from any of the councillors on the committee? Thank you. So I'd just like to say a few words about how we're going to organise this meeting. There will be some introductions at the start, but they will be brief, and then I will give the meeting over to the residents who have asked to they've asked to ask questions, basically. So firstly, Patricia Cuervo from the council will make a brief introduction. She's our flooding expert. Then Thames Water, who are sitting this side of me, will say a few words. And then Ofwat, who are further along that, will say something. We also have Doug Taylor, who from the Consumer Council for Water here, who might want to say something later on. So firstly, we will have residents who have contacted us and who have said that they wanted to speak. There are some residents, and rather quite a lot, that they want their questions read out on their behalf. So you will have to bear with me. I have rather quite a lot of questions to read out. So, but I'll do my best to, get through them. Yes, so we will have questions from members of the public, which will then be answered by Thames Water, Ofwat, and then perhaps by, if they're relevant, by some of our officers who are also here tonight. So after that, I will go to the committee and ask the committee for their questions. So without further ado, I will go to Patricia Cuervo, who would like to introduce and start the evening. One thing I must say before we all start, for people who are not used to being in the chamber, if you wish to speak or you are called to speak, and I will call people to speak, you have to press the button in front of you which says request to speak. And then when you finish speaking, you have to press it off. Okay, Patricia, thank you.
Good evening, everyone. So what happened on the 12th of July, early this year? The causes of the flooding was that we have an intense storm. The storm intensity varied greatly from the north, where it was much stronger or much more intense than the south of the borough. We have a historic lack of sewer capacity. Our sewer system is combined, and it takes rainfall, and it also takes foul water. It wasn't unable to take the amount of water that we had that day. On that day, we also had a high tide, which increase greatly the consequences of the flooding. The map that you can see on your right shows in red the areas that we designated in 2014 as critical drainage areas. So they are areas that we know have or could potentially have flooding if there was an intense storm event. And the area within the green line shows the flooded streets, or the areas where the flooding was more intense within the Kensington and Chelsea. As a council, we have different duties in regards to flooding and flooding events. So we have a duty to respond to an emergency, and that is not just our own duty, but we respond alongside other agencies. We have a duty to maintain most of our streets and road gullies and drains, and we also do that with the TfL, Transport for London, who have to maintain the strategic network, or what is called the red routes. As a lead local flood authority, we have to investigate and manage surface water flood risk, working with others. Since 2008, we have worked closely with Thames Water to try to reduce the historic lack of capacity of our Countess Creek sewer. That was the Countess Creek project, which had 4 elements to it. One was pumps to reduce or try to avoid sewer flood risk from basements or in basement. We also have a smaller scale improvement projects for the sewer. We have one in Queensdale Road, which is basically a big pump under the road. And we also had what is called sustainable drainage systems to try to reduce the amount and the speed of the water that enters the sewer system. We have one of those projects under Arundel Gardens Road, which includes permeable paving and an attenuation tank underneath. There was another element to this project, which was a strategic enlargement of the sewer system, but that was struck off in 2018. So what were the effects of the flooding? We have about 25 streets flooded. We rehoused 220 residents, some of them vulnerable. We had a block of flats totally surrounded by water, with intense damage to the car park and the basement properties. Residents couldn't go in or out of their homes. We have 3 schools affected, and one of those schools couldn't finish the term. I mean, that has to be added to the disruption that they already had during COVID times. 50 business within council premises were affected, and we know of at least another 25 businesses that were in council properties. And those are very important numbers of the effects of the flooding. However, there is something that we cannot quantify, and that's the mental health toll on our residents. Residents that worry every time it rains that they don't feel safe in their homes. And I think that's something that we should all keep in mind when we work together to try to reduce flood risk to the borough. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. So, Thames Water, is George Mayhew, do you wish to speak, or both of you?
Just me, if that's okay.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm George Mayhew. I'm the Corporate Affairs and Sustainability Director, and this is my colleague Andrew Hagger, who's in charge of our wastewater strategic planning. Chair, thank you very much for inviting us here this evening, and we look forward to answering the questions from residents here and also the councillors. I want to start by offering my deepest sympathies for those of you who've been impacted by the storms in July. The storms on the 12th and the 25th were some of the most intense we've certainly ever experienced in the capital. In just over 1 hour, we saw a month's worth of rain on the 12th of July. However, we know a number of you tried to get through to Thames Water that evening and failed, or those of you who did were hanging on the phones for way too long. Our performance when it came to responding to your calls and concerns was unacceptable on the evening. For that, I am sincerely sorry. We should have been way more responsive when you tried to get through to us. I could list out some of the measures we're taking. I'm happy to do so in the questions, that we're looking to fix the problems. We're introducing a new telephony system, retraining some of our colleagues so they're able we'll be able to be more responsive to those calls, especially in the evenings and at weekends. But I'm not making any excuses for that performance. It was unacceptable. However, the other thing I want to say is, in terms of the network itself, and I know this will be tough to hear, but the network performed as it was designed to perform, and it was simply overwhelmed by the amount of rainwater that came down in that short and intense period of time. Because the storm and the impact on so many of our customers, your residents, was so huge and so devastating, we have decided to conduct an independent review to look at exactly what happened, why it happened, how it could have been prevented, so that we and also the other parties that are accountable for flood risk management in this borough are able to come up with a concerted plan to try and solve these problems for the future. There's a lot of information that inquiry has to get through, so it will take 6 months to do, but when it's done, it will be shared with everyone here and others who aren't able to be here. And with that, Chair, that was all I was going to say by way of introduction. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So from Ofwat, is it John Russell? Do you wish to speak?
Yes,
You could explain exactly the relationship between you and Thames Water. I think
yes, certainly. Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the invite to be here. So if I sort of set out what Ofwat's role is, we're the economic regulator for the water sector in England and Wales, and that includes Thames Water as one of our 17 principal licensed companies. Our role is to ensure that customers get a good deal and the water companies deliver improvements and investment as required by their licenses and by environmental regulations. We ensure that regulated companies can carry out their functions, which are broadly the supply of water and wastewater services that's set out in legislation and their licenses. And we're responsible for protecting the interests of customers and securing long-term resilience. One of our main roles as the regulator is to set the service standards investment package for water companies to deliver and hold them to account for their performance. We do that partly through the 5-year price review process, so every 5 years we determine the revenue that the major water companies can collect from their customers through bills, and that's based on the efficient costs the company needs to incur to deliver investment and maintenance of their assets and achieve the improvements of service standards and services for customers. We also set performance targets and efficiency challenges to the companies to achieve, aligned with the outcomes customers would expect. So these are the sorts of things like reducing leakage, pollution incidents, sewer flooding, which is obviously extremely relevant today. And there are financial penalties for the companies if they fail to meet those targets. At the last price review in 2019, we set a service and investment package of approximately £51 billion, with targets for companies to reach to reduce leakage by 16% and pollution incidents by 30% over the 5-year period. For the purposes of this meeting, the company's general duties under the Water Industry Act are probably relevant to also mention. One of those duties, to simplify it slightly, is to ensure that it is able to effectively drain its network. Now, the surface water flooding incidents that affected residents and businesses in Kensington and Chelsea and other parts of London in July were clearly extremely distressing for those affected and will bring significant costs for residents, businesses and for the council as well. And we absolutely recognise what an upsetting and traumatic experience that is. We've heard directly from several residents, the council and from parliamentarians, and we're really eager to understand the role that Thames Water played in responding to the flooding and to understand whether Thames Water's assets performed as they should. We've also had a number of conversations about the Counters Creek project, which I'm sure we'll discuss further this evening. We've met with Thames several times, and the company has, of course, as has been mentioned, commissioned its own external review of the events in July, and we are, of course, paying close attention to the conclusions of that review. We are participants in the stakeholder group informing the review, and we're particularly eager to ensure the review is benefiting from appropriate expertise and access to the right information on the company's operation and assets. We've also emphasised the need for it to report speedily and to be open and transparent with residents and their representatives on what happened. We're glad to hear that Thames is taking action in relation to its response on the day, and we're extremely eager to ensure that the company is learning and acting on lessons learned from how it responded to customers during this incident. You've heard the company say clearly that where it identifies those lessons, it will take action, and we expect that action to take place as soon as possible and not wait for the conclusion of the independent review, which is obviously looking more at the longer term capacity in the network. And as the regulator in all these areas, we reserve the right to take further action if we're not satisfied with what Thames has done. We're requiring significant improvements in Thames's performance, reflecting its relatively poor performance in comparison to other companies against a number of measures over recent years, and we're intensively engaging with the company and its new management team on its improvement plans. Thames recognises it has a long way to go in terms of that improvement, and we will stay under close scrutiny by us throughout the period. Thank you.
Thank you. So maybe, Doug Taylor, you'd like to say who you represent? Just briefly, just so we know.
Thank you, Chair. And CCW is a statutory consumer body within the water sector. We're independent of the water companies, and we will do always our best to ensure that consumer interests are reflected in the performance of each and every one of the water companies in England and Wales. We have been approached by residents affected by the flooding in this part of London already, and we will seek to assist where we can. I'm very interested in hearing the residents tonight and what their experiences were and how the company has responded both during the events and subsequent to the events to the issues that they've raised with them. So thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to come along this evening.
Thank you. So now we will go to questions from residents. The first one I have noted down is Aleo Carson. Are you here tonight? If you would like to ask a question, and then we'll get an answer from Thames Water.
The question's for Thames Water. I've lived in the ground floor and basement of number 4 Royal Crescent and in the road for 40 years. And on the 12th of July, the rain and sewage upsurge poured into my basement, which included my bedrooms and all their contents, books, paintings, boiler, computer, telephone and everything else. The flat in the basement is derelict, as of today. So here's the question for you, please. I was also flooded in July 2007, and we applied for a flip, getting a negative reply from Thames Water in July 2008, having been sent various people to assess the property by yourselves. I've actually kept all the letters from Thames Water. I've got everything here. The letter was written by one Bob Collington. I want to ask if Thames Water, having turned down our request for a flip in 2008, as there is insufficient space within the sewer to carry out the work safely, well, why were so many other houses or flats on my street given access or given a flip, which I've now discovered is often dug at the bottom of the stairs going down into the basement area. Nothing to do with underground deep, where workmen can't go. Some have got sort of boxes off the road as well, number 17 has. Now, the next thing came up because I've just been reading the agenda, and on the page about flips, so I'd been in communication with Thames Water, I've told you. Well, we have not received one single piece of communication which is all spelt out so clearly on this agenda. We haven't had one email, we've had no one knock, we've had no letters whatsoever from the last letter on 2008 to the present day. Now, we were on your records, so my big question is, how on earth could we have fallen off that? With the Countess Creek set up being cancelled, there was something I read online saying that those on the records would be given due consideration for flips because of the Countess Creek being stopped. So I'm in a state of absolute unease about when's the next flood coming. We've done all we could, and I'd love a couple of answers, please.
Okay, the first thing I'd say, I'd absolutely apologise. I mean, what you described there is appalling. That's not the way you should be treated at all. There were certain decisions made around the installations of the flips. Certainly back in 2008, we assumed that there would be a solution that was a combination of a tunnel and the flips. So the view taken at that time was that if you didn't benefit from a flip, you would be benefiting from a tunnel. As you know, subsequently, the tunnel part of the scheme was not delivered. The only thing I can say now is apologise. We will be picking up all the customers that have expressed this concern, and we're trying to rectify that situation by assessing the situation again.
I think, with regard to all the questions that we're going to have asked here tonight, if people wish, we will forward them on to Thames Water so you can get an individual reply to your individual problem, and we can arrange that if you would like that.
No, they didn't need to worry about it. It was not their business, and I wrote a proper detailed letter, and I've received no further email letters.
If you send your details to the chair, chair will make sure it gets through to me, and I'll make sure it's dealt with. And as Andrew said, it's ridiculous. You should have had a response. We should have a response a decade ago, but.
And that goes for all the individual issues that are raised tonight. We will forward them and take them on.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Okay. So my next question is from Henry Davey.
Will the independent review consider the Lots Road pumps, how they worked, did they work properly, why were they not switched on earlier? If you look at the information provided in this document here today, it's clear that when they were switched on, it had a vacuum effect, and I was at my flat when that happened, and the water miraculously disappeared in a very quick time. I understand that's because the Lots Road pumps were turned on. Why were not turned on earlier should be part of the independent review, and I request that that information is made available to the independent review and that they look at that very carefully.
Regarding the Lots Road, it's a Victorian facility. It's manually operated. Unfortunately, the nature of the pumps, the head has to build up before we can turn the pumps on. It is absolutely going to be something that we're going to look at as part of the review, because we are looking at how we can automate that to make it operate more efficiently. And as we talk about the Thames Tideway Tunnel, that is one of the things that's going to improve the operation of Lots Road. But absolutely, this isn't just about looking at why properties flooded, but actually how the overall sewage system operated. It's important that we get to the bottom of exactly what happened on that one. So yes, we will be looking at that.
Press the button.
I'm sure that Ofwat heard what he said about the age of the pumping system and is inadequate for purpose. There's always admission of liability by Thames Water. I'm sure that Ofwat heard that. My second question is regarding the flip valves, and building on what my colleague on my right here said. There's no reason to delay putting in flip valves. We don't need to wait for the independent review to do that. And I would request that Thames Water begin the process of doing that. Bear in mind, of course, that you put in this document lots of excuses about having done lots of inquiries about who wants flip valves, who don't want flip valves. A lot of residents have changed in the area. People move all the time in this borough, like every other borough. And so you need to start the process again, really, in terms of consultation, if that's what you want to do. But there's some very clear examples of people who had flip valves who were not flooded, and the next neighbour in identical property were flooded. That could be looked at immediately, and why will that not be done, please?
Absolutely, this is something as you can appreciate, the scale of flooding in July was significant. There's a number of properties we need to look at. So that's the process we're starting to look at, actually looking at the list of the properties.
Be clear, sorry, how will residents get themselves on the list then?
Number of ways. One, after today, any resident here who wants to understand that, we will take the details, as George has mentioned. The other mechanism we have is we've taken the step of actually putting the questionnaire that customers have to fill out onto our website to make it easier for customers to advise us of what happened on the day. So that's another mechanism. Or alternatively, if you contact your local sort of Trace or wherever, what I'm saying is we're starting, as part of the independent reviews, we're starting to collate information from a number of sources to make sure we get that list.
After the meeting, would you be prepared to give us your emails, if possible?
I'm more than happy to. But, yeah. And just what Andrew said about if you go online and we can provide the chair the details on the website for the flooding forms. It's really, really important that those of you who were flooded, if you haven't filled the forms in, then please, we'll make sure you get those details through the chair, if that's all right.
Yeah.
Because what happens is that information is critical in terms of the business case we need to make to our regulator, and it's absolutely, we can't be sat here in 10 years' time and having the same conversation, and part of it was because we just didn't have the right data. So please fill out the forms. We'll give you the links. And the other thing, just in terms of your question about, do we just sort of just put a bunch of flips in now? One of the issues we have to be really careful with flips is that the water they keep out has to go somewhere, and what we've got to be really careful about is we don't just push the problem somewhere else. And that's one of the things the review will look at. It will look at the effectiveness of the flips, the Counters Creek project as it was originally intended, as it ended up being, where the rainfall fell and its intensity, and what happened with the flow of water, because it doesn't just disappear. So what we can't do is we can't come up with a solution that ends up pushing the problem elsewhere. This event in July was of such magnitude. It's one of those moments, certainly I would say in Thames Water's sort of history, and I hope the other bodies who are also responsible for the drainage system in your borough feel this is a moment in time where this data, the results of the review, and I know the council has its own review, is a moment where we really can sort of make sure, right, we know these extreme storms are going to happen more frequently. We need a network, a Thames Water Council highways network that can handle more extreme weather.
Thank you. I will now call on Hanadi Kazkaz. If you press the button to speak.
Thank you very much for having the meeting. I think you've answered my question, Mr. George, because I've witnessed a horror movie, if you want to think about it, on that day. Our neighbor, who is 85, was trapped in his flat with the water up to his chest. After 45 minutes, we managed to get him out. Unfortunately, the whole building his flat was completely destroyed. It's unfortunately an extremely unhappy place now, and I'm very worried that he's not going to survive. So apart from our place, I'm telling you what has happened on that day. It was the first time I've heard about the flip system, and it was very interesting. All the neighbors who had the flip system did not have a problem, and in his property and the other properties in our building, it went up to 130 centimeters. So as you have answered my question, which is, if you put a flip system in some properties, you're pushing it to someone else. So it seems to me it's illogical. It seems to me illegal to put it in one place and not putting it in something else. It was literally, the water was pushed to our properties on that day. So I hope you would take that into consideration and have sort of a bigger plan about what needs to be done as soon as possible. Because on that day, if we didn't manage to get the fire brigade on the right, it took them 45 minutes, but they did come. And I'm very happy to share the footage with you. You will be horrified. We would have had, unfortunately, a casualty on that day.
Thank you for that, and please, again, if your neighbour hasn't filled out this form, it's really important we get this information, because, like I said, understanding what we need to do holistically across the borough is really important.
My place was flooded, but I think seeing the horror in his flat and how we had to fight to get him out was, I mean, no one would imagine this would happen at this stage.
Thank you. So I'm now going to read out a few questions. They're about flips, so I'm going to run them together, maybe about 3 and then 2, and then ask Thames Water to answer them. So the first is, how can you refuse to install a flip in houses that had been badly affected, and in other houses where you have installed them, the properties weren't flooded in July. Then specifically, there is a question about not putting flips into Addisland Court, which is an Art Deco block of 42 flats and sub-basements with an electricity substation and where the heating is. And then the third one is, this property has not been surveyed by Thames yet, and I haven't had any responses to my letters from Thames. My understanding is that properties in the area that had been fitted with a flip did not flood. So what's the policy now? So if you take those three, and then I've got two other similar ones which I'll run together.
I think starting with the first one, there is a recurring theme here about properties surveyed and for whatever reason at the time, the decision was not to install a flip. Clearly, there was mistakes made on some of these, so we're going to revisit that. And I think, as we've mentioned, we're going to try and get to the bottom of all the properties that were impacted and look again at the purpose of the flips. In terms of the Addisland Court, one of the things that we did for the Counters Creek scheme is, as George mentioned, we used the information that was on what we call a sewer flooding history database. So we were targeting properties that we knew had a history of flooding, and that's how we captured for these forms. At the time, Addisland wasn't a property that actually appeared on that register, so it wasn't at our forefront of actually looking at one of the properties. Clearly, things have changed, so we obviously need to revisit that. One thing I would say, though, is that in terms of the Counters Creek scheme, as part of targeting that scheme, we were looking to target around 1,240 properties that were on that sewer flooding history database. A huge number. By the end of AMP6, we had done around 1,100 flips. I'm saddened to hear about properties that flooded, who didn't have a flip, who weren't protected, but equally, the fact that you start to see that the roads of property were protected by flips at least gives me some comfort that you can see the type of solution that can actually prevent this type of flooding. So first and the third questions were very much about why didn't we survey these properties, why didn't we consider flips? I think we've taken away that there needs to be that list, we need to look at that, and we will look at all those properties that potentially need to be considered for a flip.
Okay, so I have another question here, which is going back very much to what Ms. Kaz was saying, that one of the problems, from what I gather, is that the flip switches bounce water from one property to another. Should these switches be removed, as it seems that they have exacerbated the problem with more houses now flooded? And there's another question about the houses being fitted with them after the 2007 floods, and why are they not being installed now? Why did you stop installing flips, and do they make it work for other properties?
If I could start with why we appear to stop installing flips. As I mentioned, when we designed the scheme for Counters Creek, we looked at all the properties we had a record of flooding, and that was the circle around the 1,240. We went through and did about 1,100 flips to those properties. The properties that didn't receive a flip was either because there was a reason for the customer not wanting to take up the flip. For various reasons, customers didn't want those, but that was a very small number. In terms of why additional properties are flooding, the storm, as George mentioned, it's one of the biggest we've seen. So properties that, so for instance, we talk about the likelihood of flooding. The likelihood of flooding of, on 2007 was less than 1%. The flooding that happened in July was of a much lower frequency. But this is not us saying that that shouldn't have happened. What we're saying now is we need to look at this again and work with our risk management authorities to understand how we manage and protect against these things going forward.
So I have another question about flips, and this seems to be that the criteria for getting a flip seems to be a high risk of getting flooded 3 times in a month and or having suffered flooding over the last 2 years. And the question is, why don't flash floods count? And also, surely, and this is what happened to this property, being flooded by black sewage water should be an indication that you would need a flip.
So just on that, what we're talking about here is the level of risk. At the time, we were looking to protect properties to this less than a 3% chance. Now we're having to look at a much greater level of protection because, as we mentioned, these severe summer storms that we're seeing are happening more frequently. So we need to start to think again about that. So we're learning. We're appointing this independent party to come in and actually advise us what we can do better, and we'll take that learning away and actually implement it at our earliest opportunity.
So I'm actually going to take the questions I've got down here, and then I'll take people who haven't registered, if you don't mind. So yeah, the final question from that resident was, what about upsizing the sewers around Norland Square and the surrounding streets as a solution? And then I'll go on to the next question, which was, why was the 300 million Countess Creek project abandoned and no alternative remedies put in place? And I would like to add here that a lot of time was spent, a lot of reports were written. There was an awful lot of discussion about the Countess Creek alleviation sewer. My understanding was that it was to intercept 7 sewers to provide like a tunnel which was about 5 metres wide, and at 5 points, 2 in Hammersmith and Fulham and 3 in Kensington and Chelsea, it would basically, it was a relief sewer, and it would, you know, provide excess capacity. And then in 2018, I mean, the flips were carried on with, and so were the suds and all the rest of it. But the actual thing that was going to increase capacity, you had a change of heart in 2018. And I've read all the papers recently again, and it's not quite clear why that happened. Surely the problem here is one of capacity, and that's what we need, is greater capacity in the sewer.
If I can start with the Norland Square area, actually we did enlarge the sewers back in about 2004 as part of what we call the Westbourne Grove scheme. That was designed at the time to around a 1 in 30 years scheme. Now there was flooding again at this time. One of the things that we were concerned about with the tunnel was the tunnel was designed to contain a certain volume of flow. What the flips offered over and above was that they protect properties when the sewer surcharges to ground level. So actually what we were finding is the properties that were protected by flips have actually got a greater level of protection than they would have had with the tunnel. So it's maybe a difficult thing to say, but actually if we'd gone for the tunnel and not the flips, we probably would have seen more properties flooded in July. Now, in terms of the design of the system, many properties and basement properties in Countess Creek are protected by cast iron flat valves. These cast iron flat valves were put in when the sewage system was first created, because some of you may be aware that the sewage system, the origin of it, is in what we call the Lost Rivers. So the sewers are actually quite shallow compared to the basements. At the time, a number of these properties were protected by these flat valves. And this is what led us to actually understanding that the flips was an eminently more sensible solution to this problem than trying to lower the water level in it. Because when you lower the water level, if it's a bigger storm that comes along that you've designed for, unfortunately the water level is going to rise and get back into the properties. And this is why we flipped a little bit, sorry, didn't mean to use that word there, why we went towards the flips as a alternative solution, which we saw as an eminently more safer solution to try and reduce the risk of flooding.
But it was envisaged that all 4 points would be followed. It wasn't either or, was it? It was the flips as well, and suds, and...
Yep. So the suds that we did, so the Green Streets project we did, you're correct. The solution that we looked at, and as part of in AMP4, we started to put around 670 flips into the catchment as an intermediary stage, because we knew at the time the tunnel was going to take about 10 years to level. What we were finding was actually the tunnel was becoming less and less effective in dropping the water level in Countess Creek, and we were becoming more reliant on flips to provide the level of protection. Such so it got to the point that the tunnel was quite ineffective in actually drawing the flow down to the point that we needed. And this was worry, it was something that we came aware of quite late into the stage. And this is why we had to change our tact in terms of actually looking at what we call almost property level protection. And now this is where we're at, the continuation of the flips.
Okay, I will call on Dominic Woods. Are you here?
Yes, indeed. Dominic Woods.
If you would like to ask your question.
Yeah, on the West End Forum. Yeah, just picking up from there was, 100 million pounds went off with Macquarie. Actually, the shareholders of Thames Water at the time, and that's why it didn't get built. But
could you speak up a bit? Pull it.
and then they sold their shares, and that's why it didn't get built. But yeah, with regard to Ofwat and the settlement for the settlement between Ofwat and Thames Water, it is that they have to produce a yearly report on what they're doing to alleviate the flooding, and by 2023, in 2 years' time, 1.5 years' time, they have to find a final solution, pretty much. So that's actually what's going on. But I offer another solution. The Thames Valley is a V in its exaggerated form, and Basil Jett and his lads say if this was Hampstead here, and this was Chelsea here, and that was the Counter Creek sewer running down there, which is basically a tube. It goes to meet on a T-junction. Basil Jett's foreshore drainage system goes down to Beckton, also at a gradient, and it's just a gradient system of tubes. And it overflows into the Thames whenever it rains, and it was illegal to do so according to European law. So therefore, the government was forced to pay for the Thames Tideway Tunnel. And also contained in the same decision by Ofwat was that Thames Water must consider all new elements that come on board, including TTT, Thames Tideway Tunnel. So the connection between the new Thames Tideway Tunnel due in 2026, which is not that far away, is again, so the tube that runs along the foreshore of the Thames is a round tube, like so, and the top bit of it overflows into the Thames, and in that event, which is every heavy rainfall, pretty much daily, the poo goes into the Thames. So what the trick has been missed here is, instead of doing it from the top of the round tube, you take the connection down to the bottom of the tube, and then that drains into the TTT. So in the modelling, perhaps Thames Water and Ofwat might want to consider looking at that as a cost saver, because £400 million is, I grant you, a lot of money to find again, even if Macquarie has gone running off with it. So we are where we are, back in 2007, and just to cap where we are, I mean, the event that causes flooding in Kensington and Chelsea is related to uphill at Hampstead or Brent area, and it comes down the Thames. It comes down the tube at a terrific rate, and when the local floodwater stuck in RBKC is now sitting in the tube of Counters Creek, then the new water from North London comes down and collides with it, and this action forces water to spout up through the manhole covers as it's got nowhere to go. So my question is, would Thames Water and Ofwat consider looking at a new connection of the Thames Tideway Tunnel, which has not been really fully investigated, because if it's draining straight away rather than when it's about to flood, I mean the device. I mean, you should look at it. So I think it's something worth looking at.
Let me start. So first thing you said, I think about I think you may have sort of alluded to, did our old shareholders pocket the money? I think that was kind of no, the money that was not spent was given back to customers. In terms of you're absolutely right in the terms of the way the water flows down the catchment, and I think this is one of the things that's really, and it will be addressed as part of our independent review, is we are engaged with not just this council, but with all the councils that sort of go from sort of Sutton, then all the way up through to Brent, and actually around to Waltham Forest as well, who were hit quite badly on the second flood, the 25th of July event. And we need to look at a whole system approach. The Tideway Tunnel thing, I mean, I'm not an engineer, but the people who are on the independent review are engineers, and they will be, having a look at how the water flows through the catchment, because it's not very good if we put a load of measures in this borough, and then you get water coming down from elsewhere. So we need to work through that, and the independent review will look at all of that.
Just a couple of things. It was Thames customers that paid for the Thames Tideway Tunnel, as opposed to the government body. The other point is, you mentioned Cremorne Wharf. We did actually secure a point at Cremorne Wharf and looked at that as a possible solution. Unfortunately, what we found is that even pumping up the flows at that point wouldn't have actually helped us. It was mentioned Lotts Road. Lotts Road is a critical pumping station. One of the things we've been looking at is electrification, automation of that, because we recognise the expedience of operating Lotts Road is a key one. The other one is Hammersmith pumping station. So in terms of the Bazalgette sewer, what they do is they actually intercept the base flow, because the sewers that run tangentially to the river are effectively the old rivers, and they are storm outfalls. So the bit that we've got to be careful is that the storm discharge of the rainfall should go out to the river. What we want to avoid is the wastewater element in it, and that's the bit the Thames Tideway Tunnel is trying to do, is to take out the polluting element of it to carry on to Beckton.
Chair, thank you, Chair. Just to address Mr. Woods' sort of comments, I can't speak to the technical feasibility of your suggestion, but I think as Thames Water have said, that's the sort of thing you'd expect the independent review to consider. But as you also mentioned, as part of the last periodic review in 2019, we set a very clear requirement on Thames Water to do a comprehensive study of all the issues affecting flood risk in the Counters Creek catchment, and as you say, that is expected to be completed by July 2023. I think if you just had your home flooded, 2023 feels like a long time away, but these are sort of complex issues that the company needs to get a grip on and develop its understanding of. I think they have started that process, but possibly have not made a huge amount of progress so far. The independent review it's commissioned hopefully will help them along that road. With regard to the funding settlement and the finances concerning Counters Creek, it's possibly worth just clarifying. In 2014, the company was allowed to collect revenue to make a significant investment of something like £227 million. A significant amount of money was spent on developing the project, as well as doing flips and other interventions. But at our 2019 price review, we determined that the company had cancelled the sewer expansion for reasons that were under its control, and as a result of that, we imposed an underperformance payment on the company equivalent to about £130 million, which was returned to customers, and the regulated capital value of the wastewater bit of their business was reduced by about £149 million. So, as Thames Water say, the money that was not spent, that was originally allowed, has been returned to customers, but there was a significant amount of money spent on developing the project and on doing some of the actual physical interventions that we've heard about tonight in terms of flips and suds, etc.
Next question is, can Thames Water explain their drain maintenance procedures? Thank you.
Okay, so there's a number of activities we actually undertake in terms of drain maintenance. We regularly CCTV the sewers in and around Counters Creek to understand if there's blockages or if there's remedial works. For the larger sewers, we actually undertake walkthroughs, and this is to observe and maintain the flat valves that we mentioned. In addition to that, we periodically jet the sewers, and what this means is for jetting equipment, we go through and clean the sewers to make sure they're free of debris. The sewers actually in the area are quite large. They don't tend to problematic for blockages, but what we don't do is actually maintain the gully gratings in the carriageways, because that's a highway authority asset for them to maintain.
We will, yes, but I was just going to go through all the people who've registered first. But residents have been asking. Okay, I'll take a few questions from the floor, and then I'll go back to the ones I've got written down here. So if you would like, sir, if you would like to speak.
My name's Justin Downs, and I was a victim of the flood. In fact, my office was completely destroyed. And George, I did actually write to you, you may recall, asking about these flips. I didn't get a response. And I also think that it would be right for Ian Marchant or Sarah Bentley to be present at this meeting. I think we need to have a main board member at these meetings. It's unfair on you. I think you've done a great job defending Thames Water, but I think a member of the main board should have been here.
So first of all, Mr. Downs, I do recall our correspondence, and I will chase up why you haven't got a response. I am sorry about that. Seems a bit of a theme, to be honest.
That's fine, thanks.
Sorry, can I just ask, just let me ask then. And then, in terms of, so I'm a member of the leadership team, the executive team. I'm sorry if I'm not senior enough, but I can assure you, my boss is the chief executive. I sit on our exec team, which is the team that runs the company, and I have their authority. You know, what I say represents exactly what both that team and the board feel and think. And again, just to reassure you, when at the next exec team meeting, which is on Thursday, and the next board meeting, and I do attend most of our board meetings, I will be sharing with them what happened at this event and what was said, and so that my colleagues have a full appreciation. On top of that, this is being recorded, as were the Teams meetings that took place, I think in July. And the independent review will also be seeing footage of this and those meetings as well.
Chair, if I may.
Okay, yeah, if you could say who you are.
Yes, sure. My name is Tommy Stadden. I've been a resident of this borough my entire life. I've been asked by some of my neighbours to express 3 very specific questions for you that we'd appreciate answers for. But before I do that, I've also been asked to check that you understand the magnitude of your Thames Water's negligence and what you've caused. You've caused not only tens of millions of pounds, if not more, of damage to people's homes and businesses. You have destroyed people's homes, including mine. You have had, your negligence has caused rats and human excrement to pump up into, in some cases, very vulnerable people's homes. In one case, a lady died following the distress of having her home destroyed by your negligence very quickly after her home was flooded. We live in what is meant to be the most significant megacity in the world, and yet we have a situation in one of the richest boroughs, in some ways, where people are afraid every time it rains that through your continued negligence, which you've known about since the last floods, that their homes will be destroyed, and as we've heard, people's lives put at risk. This is, in some ways, the most underprivileged of boroughs. It has some of the most underprivileged people in the country who live emotionally and literally in the shadow of Grenfell, where through a mixture of the authorities and private companies immorally letting them down, they have suffered obviously hugely. But unfortunately for you, it also has some of the most powerful people in the country. It has newspaper editors, government ministers, and worst of all for you, it has some of the top lawyers in the country who are willing to work for free to solve this, and they are more than even the ill-gotten gains of Thames Water can afford. And we will not rest as a group until you solve these problems. And we will come after you through the commercial courts. We will come after your officers and your shareholders and your directors in the criminal courts, because let me remind you that foul water is toxic, is known by you to be dangerous to human health. I know this because my wife, who is pregnant, was made ill within hours of our house being flooded. So let me put you on notice, and those in power at Ofwat, our MP, anyone else in power who is not holding Thames Water to account, will come after you too. I now have 3 very specific points. The flip valves, it's obvious. There's no need for a review. You have installed them in people's homes. They stopped the flooding, and the homes next door which did not have them had flooding. It's too late for you to say you're worried about water going from flip valves into other people's homes, because that's just admitting yet more criminal negligence. So are you going to install flip valves on the homes in the vulnerable street which don't have them now, not in 6 months' time? Secondly, you've admitted that the pumps at Lotts Road were not switched on in time, that they are not fit for purpose and they're Victorian. Will that be solved urgently? Thirdly, will you admit now that your attempts, successful in the end, to wriggle out of doing the sewer enlargement after the last floods were wrong, and that you should now do that work? And I will just finish by saying to Ofwat that you've heard Thames Water say that their system worked exactly as it should have done. If that's the case, I suggest you take their licence and their monopoly and give it to some professionals who can get the job done.
So I'm afraid I'm not going to say anything that will satisfy you. The flip valves, as already been said, it is given the severity of the storm, we felt that it justified bringing some independent experts in to consider the magnitude of what happened, why it happened, how it happened, and what could be done to prevent it. The fact of the matter is, as far as we see, was our network was overwhelmed by the intensity of the rainstorm. And I think it's absolutely critical that we have a considered view about what should be done. As I've already said, there's flip valves that worked. We need to understand the extent of the success, what the properties that didn't have flip valves, what happened to them, what could have happened if, in terms of the measures that were already put in place as part of the Countess Creek programme, and what could have happened if the Countess Creek programme, as originally intended, was put in. The solutions we need to come up with need to work for decades. We have to wait for this review. And I know it's not going to satisfy a lot of you here, but when we do this, we need to do it properly. On top of that, we do need to consider the impact the other drainage assets for which we're not responsible had on the Thames Water ones. We have a combined sewage network in London because our under the ground is so congested. And it's a system, it's a whole system, and you need to, if you address one bit of it, you need to understand the impacts on the other, and that's what the independent review will do. So we're going to do it. When we've done it, we will come back, and we won't, it's an independent review. They'll come back, they'll share with you the outcome, and then it will be a matter of implementing whatever they say as best we can.
Right, I'll call Tarek, and then the lady over there. So
Hi, I'm Tariq Gotti. I live in an estate that's run by RBKC. It was a bomb shelter before, opened by the Queen's late mother in 1953. I'm a victim, and I'll show you the injuries I've received and also my whole family. Neglected. I'm sorry, I appreciate you blaming Thames Water, but what is this RBKC doing, not taking? They just come and sit there and say, oh yeah, I've complained 11 years of your sewage, your drainage, you've neglected all. And then you come to my flat, say, yes, we got you covered and this and that. I'm sorry, listen, we've gone through the Grenfell stuff, we've gone through this. I'm sorry, I was born in Sierra Leone, grew up in the States, I've gone through everything. People say the blades or whatever. I'm a little bit emotional, so I'm gonna have my colleague take over because I'm shaken. But I feel you're blaming everything on these guys. When you, the council itself, you refused to do the drainage in Henry Dickens. We've literally saw you come and tell them to walk away and not drain these holes that have caused damage to my flat, and I'll share every video to these people. A 4-year-old autistic felt suicidal because he thought he was drowning. I was there helping vulnerable bedbound people. I've sent all the videos to the council. You still ignored it. I've spoken to these gentlemen before they walked in here, and I've showed them videos. Yes, Thames Water is to blame, but also the council need to go out there and do their job as well. Whether it's the rich people's house, the middle class, the low class. I've been considered a second-class citizen. I was born as a British in Sierra Leone under Margaret Thatcher, and I'm still treated like a foreigner. Look at this, all I've written here. You left me suicidal on the 12th of July. Lucky for the NHS that I've volunteered. 1.9 million people I've fed over the pandemic to come and support me mentally, and I'm still scarred. What are you guys gonna do? You talk about just Thames Water, these guys. What is the council doing? Okay. I've written to every council member.
I'm going to ask, we've got Terry and Patricia. We can talk about the drains and who's responsible for what, wherein lies the...
Just introduce myself. So my name's Terry Oliver, Director for Cleaner, Greener and Cultural Services. So that includes overseeing the waste and street cleansing contract. So there is an annual gully cleansing programme in the council, and that does include cleaning every street or all the gullies at least once a year. In the flood risk areas, that's twice a year, and on the market streets like Portobello Road, that's every 6 weeks. I really sorry to hear your story, and I think the housing, the old TMO estates, they do need to be looked at because some of that is included and some of it isn't. So I'm quite happy to go back to our housing colleagues and pick up what happened with Henry Dickens to make sure that that isn't repeated.
I'm still living in the same property, sure. And I'll show you the proof. Smell like damp. Yeah. Medical have requested my kids vacate the house, but RBKC refused to help. You talk about putting people, 220 families in hotels. I don't need your hotel. All I need is deep cleaning and be severely sympathetic, not just, yeah, I got you and this. I'm sorry, I know how politics work. I've been there before. I'm a victim of 9/11, but I don't point fingers at anyone. But this time I'm ready to point finger. If it means I'm gonna lose everything of my breathing, you guys have to take responsibility also, not just point at one person.
I'm going to call, Mariam, I'll call you next, but the lady next to you, and then I'll call you, Mariam. If you could say who you are.
Yes, thank you very much. I want to, in particular, thank Mr. Sadler for having spoken for all of us. It is no doubt a historic problem that we long-term residents, I've been resident in this council for 40 years, so it's a historic problem we have with Thames Water in the sense that many people in this room were flooded with sewage in 2007. I was flooded with sewage water in 2009. I was never offered any help from Thames Water. I was never offered a flip device. My basement flooded utterly and totally, devastating all my possessions, and devastating, more importantly, my son, who is also autistic, and who now has epileptic seizures every time he sees rain clouds. Now, we don't live in an underdeveloped country in a village with no means. We live in one of the richest capitals in the world, and Thames Water is one of the richest companies in the world, with offshore shareholders, which you seem to care much more about than your clients. I wrote to you, I emailed you, I didn't get the courtesy of a reply. Of course I tried to telephone you. You have apologized for your telephone operators not responding. But what is your excuse for not responding to a letter or to an email? What is your excuse for having not one Thames Water truck on the street? Is it because you only care about your shareholders in China and the United Arab Emirates? If that is the case, then yes, your monopoly needs to be taken away, and faster than the 6 months you propose to let us stew in damp and sewage.
Thank you for your question. First of all, you should have been responded to, and as I said, there's quite a strong theme here. So again, please, if you can send your details in through the chair, then we will make sure it gets a response. Just in terms of our shareholders, I'm not going to talk to the ones that we used to have, but all I can say is the ones we have now, that are predominantly pension funds. They have not taken a dividend for the last 4 years since they've been shareholders. So, but I'm not going to explain away the behaviours maybe of some of the previous ones. But I am so sorry we didn't respond to you. Please, if you could send your details in. Again, if I'll keep saying it, but filling that questionnaire that's online and putting in the details is going to be really essential so that we get all the information we need to make, so we understand who needs what and by when. So that'd be great. If you haven't done it, please do it.
Oh, hi. My name is Rasheen Cosgrave, and I'm here with my husband, Louis Islami.
Hello.
Hi.
I didn't call you to speak. I called Marion to
Okay,
speak.
sorry.
Speak afterwards. Thank you.
I live in Portobello Market. As far as I know, and I've been there over 60 years, I have the only basement flat in the entire length of Portobello Road in the market area. So far from nobody knowing what happened to me, it was my lavatory that was on the BBC News. It was on the ITV News. It's on YouTube. In the course of this event, I spoke to one Thames Water manager who came to the market. The councillors brought them down. And I said, I'm homeless. I'm 75 years old. My place is destroyed. What are you going to do for me? And he said, nothing. That's all I've heard from Thames Water. You haven't written to me. You haven't provided. There's been no contact at all. And as far as RBKC is concerned, I have heard, apart from a couple of councillors who were obviously dressed to the nines going somewhere, made a social call a couple of days afterwards, I haven't seen anything from the council, not even from the market office, from social services. You know, as it happens, I'm fortunate, I don't need it. But what about the people who do need it? They've got nothing. And when I told one of your colleagues, the councillor, that not only had the council built at the bottom of a hill on a crossroad a traffic calming hump which acted when the water, it was mostly coming down from Kilburn westward. It was acting as an aqueduct without walls and a dam for the water coming down Portobello Road. And on our section of the crossroads, on our branch of the crossroads with Elgin Crescent, all 4 gullies were blocked, okay? So the water came over the pavement, and then people drove through it, and the water went into the shop above my flat. And so all the water not only came out of the sewer from the toilet, it came from the ceiling, and doubled the level of the losses I've suffered. And the council has not come to find out if I'm dead or alive. And Portobello Road is not mentioned on this list that you provided of streets that have been affected. And if Terry, Mr. Oliver, claim, I know he believes it, that all the gullies in the market, for instance, are cleansed every 6 weeks. All 4 were blocked. A man with a spade came down, big boots and a spade, came and rammed his spade down into the gullies and cleared them, and the road emptied like a bath. And the next morning, I'm standing next to an Evening Standard journalist, and we watched an unmarked small gully lorry come down the road. They cleansed 2 gullies, the ones on the opposite side of the road, but not on my side of the road, and then drove off. And I saw that unmarked gully lorry several times in the next few days. So you cannot tell me that these gullies are cleaned. Doesn't matter what the paperwork said. I've analysed the paperwork from the waste management contract in this borough for years, and it's all a pack of lies. Thank you.
Terry.
Thank you, Marion. I know we have spoke about this before, so the Portobello Road was cleaned on the Sunday before the flooding, and we can argue that, but the contractor we have, Suez, who conduct all the gully cleansing, the programme is up to date. It was cleaned on the Sunday before. The issue, I think, what you're talking about, when the actual person put the spade in, there's a lot of runoff that caused like debris and stuff to clog up those drains. If you just put that spade in, it was mostly a thin layer, then it caused the drain, it allowed the drains to actually drain away all the water. If it was really blocked, a spade would not have done that. The way that our drains are cleaned, we've got a 16-ton gully lorry that goes around, it sucks out all the muck from the drains, that gets taken away, and at the same time we flush them with clean water until that water runs away, so we know every drain is cleared. And that's the process that's done for every single gully. And as I said, the Portobello is done every 6 weeks. The 7 o'clock or 7:30 issue you raised, that was a separate call-in from Street Line, or someone called that in, and that was a special arrangement that we went back to there to make sure those gullies were cleaned. And that gully lorry was so busy that week just making sure that those flooded areas, the gullies were clean just in case it did rain again. So, yeah.
Terry, I live there. I've lived there for years. I am telling you that it doesn't matter what the paperwork says, those gullies are not cleaned, and the same is true all over the borough. If after a few days these gullies block up, then they need to be done every week.
Thank you. So there's a lady at the back there. I don't know who you are. If you'd like to say who you are, and
oh, hi. Good evening. Sorry, can I just respond?
Oh, sorry, Elizabeth, I didn't see you.
Have I got the right thing on? Just like to say, number one, I'm really sorry you felt that the council didn't help at all. I was actually in the respite centre on the night of the flood, and we did manage to get 120 people into hotels, but I'm really sorry that we obviously didn't come across you. And equally, the next day, I did come to Portobello Road to talk to the businesses to hear firsthand what had happened. So I saw the flooding, as you said, and came back to ask Terry about the gully cleansing. So we did support a lot of people into hotels. We provided people with accommodation, food, laundry, and it was turn-year blind. But I'm very sorry if that didn't include you. So I just thought I ought to apologise for that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So the lady at the back there.
Hi again. Yeah, my name is Rasheen Cosgrave, and I'm here with my husband, Louis Islami. We are living on Addison Crescent, or we were living on Addison Crescent. Like my neighbor here, our property has been completely destroyed, derelict, and I doubt we will be able to return there for the next 12 months, okay? All of the plaster, 2 meters, has been removed from the wall. the floorboards, all of our tiles, everything has just been removed. I have not been allowed to return to the property due to, for health reasons, because of the risk of contamination from spores. So, you know, there's been a huge impact to us. We've written numerous letters to the councillors, okay, and recently, on the 22nd of September, we were assured that Mike Benke was going to arrange to come and visit us on Addison Crescent to look at the damage that we've experienced. We have not heard back from Mr. Benke, okay? Mr. Tasselidis, or Councillor Tasselidis and Councillor Campbell were copied on that email. Now, you mentioned the importance, George, of the forms. I'm surprised that you are not, if this vital information is so important, why are you not working with the councillors to collect the data directly by doing mail drops or something like that? You know, we're not aware that we would have to fill out that form. We did try to contact you. We've contacted the councillors and colleagues, you know, and, you know, Mr. Benke, he has not told us that we have to fill out this form. You could do mail drops, you could work with the council to ensure that you're gathering this information. But as you know, you don't need to do like a 6-month review. I think you already know what needs to be done, okay? And I don't understand why you need, you know, just get on with it.
MT, can I just come in on that? Oh, sorry, I better speak into the mic. Can I start by thanking you for coming and saying how sorry I am to hear that you still haven't been visited by Thames Water. I do recall replying to your email and urging Thames Water to make a visit to Addison Crescent. I know that people across my ward in Holland have been very badly affected. I spoke to Mr. Benke earlier today. He's in the chamber, and urged him to make sure that the visit happens as soon as possible. I hope it will happen this week, but I share your disappointment that it hasn't happened until now, and I do think that Thames Water needs to do much more to make sure that residents feel heard. I'm particularly concerned that many residents who have spoken today already haven't even had replies, given that we are now months past the initial flooding. So can I associate myself with many of the remarks that have been made tonight and apologise that my pressure on Thames Water hasn't yet brought the visit that I think you deserve to Addison Crescent.
Just one other thing. The cost of this is being picked up by insurance companies, okay? I'm sure that Hiscox has just been hammered by everybody in our area in terms of the cost to the repairs, which is just going to come back to all of us in increased premiums. And so, this is within your tolerance level, but you guys are knowingly letting, the insurance companies, cover your cost of infrastructure where, if there would be a fraction of the wastage in terms of and damage to people's livelihoods and well-being, if you would just address the fundamental issues of the overflow, etc.
So thank you very much for your question, and we will get someone down. I'll follow that up personally. To the councillor's point about the number of people who haven't had responses yet, back yet, we have a huge backlog, and we've been struggling to get on top of it. So, and it's a point very well made. We're well behind, and we need to try and catch up. And that, Mr. Downs, I think that goes back to your point as well, and a number of others. I completely appreciate the desire just to get on with it, completely understand that, but like I said, the measures we need to look at have to be measures that are considered and will protect you in the way that we would all want, and we need to do the analysis. And I know it's really frustrating. I wish I could just wave a magic wand and make it all be fine, but there are so many integral parts to this. It's really important we get it right. And as I said, there is a linkage between, as one of the questioners mentioned earlier, the linkage between this borough and the other boroughs in the catchment. In terms of the compensation insurance point, again, this is, you're not going to like this at all, but we are not liable was we have no control in terms of what goes into the sewer. We can't control the amount of water that goes into it, and it was the amount of the intense level of rainfall, as we've said already, that caused the issues that we're talking about. It's a very different matter if it was a water pipe that burst. That's straightforward. It's our pipe, it's our water, and it's our problem. But with a waste network, because we have a combined network in the capital, we can't control what goes in it, and that was the problem that happened in July.
My name's Nick Stadden. I've lived in the borough for nearly 50 years. I think anybody reading the transcript of these proceedings or watching it on the recording will be staggered in the light of the Grenfell saga to hear the response of Thames Water. It's a combination of admissions of negligence over the last 10 years, coupled with a complacent statement that nothing can be done for the next 6 months or so, because what is needed is a considered analysis of the situation. That might be understandable for a water authority that had only just taken over responsibility, but Thames Water has been responsible for well over a decade. We were told that there was a solution that was agreed, which was a tunnel combined with flip valves. At some point it was decided to abandon the tunnel and to rely only on flip valves, and then we were told by Thames Water that for reasons of incompetence, many people were simply not issued with flip valves. And today we're told that flip valves may not be issued in future because it might have an adverse effect on neighbours. Well, if that was so, why were they issued 10 years ago to some people and not to others? The idea that Thames Water's responsibilities are to be assessed and judged by reference to starting looking at this problem afresh today, as though it was not predicted and not preceded by similar floods in the past, is astonishing. And I very much encourage the board members of Thames Water, when they read these proceedings and view these proceedings, to recognise that the buck stops with them. And what has taken place today, I think, is a unique admission on the part of a public authority of negligence followed by complacency. And to tell people in this room who have suffered the horrors that we've heard of having their basements flooded, that we're frightfully sorry, but you'll have to wait for 2 years, and let's just hope it doesn't rain in the next 2 years like it did in July, is truly shocking.
It's more of a statement, I think, a question, but and I'm very conscious I'm getting very repetitive. I don't think I admitted negligence. I absolutely admitted that our response in terms of on the evenings and the days of the floods was not what it should be at all. People couldn't get through, and if they did, they were on the phone for hours. As I said, unacceptable. And we need to fix it, and we have a plan in place to do that, and that's not going to require a 6-month review. We know what we need to do. We're going to get on with it. In terms of the broader piece around the assets, as I said, the assets were designed to cope with a certain amount of weather, and we experienced 1 month's rain in an hour, which was extraordinary. In our experience, it was the worst storm that a number of us have seen, and certainly a number of my colleagues who've been in the business a lot longer than I. And the whole point of having the review is that these weather events are clearly going to become more frequent if you believe, like we do, in climate change, and that we need a set of solutions that will be the right ones for the years ahead. And it would be absolutely wrong to knee-jerk without doing the analysis that we need to do, because when we do this, we want to get it done once and don't do it right. If you know, we will look as part of the independent review about, in theory, how would the Countess Creek, the original proposal, how would that have performed? And, you know, we will share, well, the independent review will share all that information with you for you to scrutinise. But we do know if in your neighbouring borough in Westminster, there was a scheme that went in there designed to the same specification, a 1 in 30 storm, and that filled up with stormwater pretty much straight away, and properties were still flooded. And the questions they have are, it wasn't big enough, was it? So we're looking at that as well. So we need to make sure that what we do is done in a considered and thoughtful way. And I think that's the most important thing and the most essential thing that we can be doing right now.
Was it only in July that you realised that these storms were likely to become a phenomenon of the future?
And I think that even the Met Office struggled to predict the storm that took place in July. Like I said, it was 1 month's rain in an hour, and that was one of the most intense storms that we've ever seen, and it was very, very localised. So yes, I mean and then a couple of weeks later we had another one that wasn't quite of the same intensity, but intense nonetheless.
I'm going to call Siobhan Loughran. Are you here? You had a question.
Well, I've listened to what everyone said. I live on Holland Villas Road, and I believe there was a burst pipe at the top of the street, so therefore that maybe means you have some liability. You just said that, but I also do want to know what the temporary situation is going to be when you're doing this review, because we can't be waiting around because there could be a storm any time in the next year. I have 3 children, no kitchen, and, you know, it's just unacceptable.
We heard reports of a burst pipe. There was no burst pipe in the area.
I have pictures, I think.
Then please let me have them, because we would, you know, we know when pipes burst because people lose water supply, and we had no reports of anyone losing water supply. So we're pretty sure there were no burst pipes on that evening.
Okay, what about my next question?
Like I said, our focus has got to be on getting all the data in to see, you know, who was impacted, the extent of the impact, why it happened, and what we've got to do about it. And that is the role that we must play and we must focus on.
So what are we meant to do in the meantime?
As I said, the responsibility for the borough's flooding approach is we're one party of it. There's more than us, and I think it's probably makes sense for all the parties to get together to answer that question.
I am going to ask Layla Rahman. Is she here? Layla Rahman? No? Okay. Who had their hand up? I'll take you first and then the other. No, I'm not coming on to councillors yet, I'm afraid. I know you're a resident as well, but...
My question is quite different from any others that's been asked tonight. I have a building on Ledbury Road near Shepstow Villas. I've been there for 24 years. When I bought it, we had it surveyed. It had never flooded, and it didn't flood in 2007. It did flood quite badly on the 12th of July, along with most of the other shops. This is a flat above a shop. It's a road of basically flats above shops, and they're all independent. They're all little businesses, which make up the area which has become very known around the world as Portobello, Notting Hill, the fantastic area that everybody goes to. Rents are very high, council tax is extremely high, and so the business rates rather, and we've just had a year of shops being closed, not being able to make a living. It's the most extraordinary time I've ever lived in. So this basement flooded. I wrote to Thames Water. The answer I got was, Thames Water doesn't have anything to do with the shop. It's a subsidiary of Thames Water, so they can't do anything. So I'm thinking to myself, well, that's odd. I live above. It's the same drains, the same water. It's all going in one place. Why is Thames Water basically saying they're washing their hands of it? Well, I then went to every single shop on the road. I went inside every shop and I asked what happened on the 12th of July. It was very interesting because some of them had clear water. Some of them had sewage, horrible sewage. And some of them had flips and didn't get flooded at all. Okay, so I'm thinking to myself, where do I start with this thing? How do I begin to even understand the ramifications of this thing for the future? The basement is unusable. What does that mean in terms of the rent? What does that mean in terms of the rates? What does this actually mean in terms of the whole area? Not just the area, but London, everywhere. How are we going to solve these big problems? Not little problems like flips, the big problem. I would like to see a map of my street, underneath the street, where all the drains are, all the pipes are, where the various valves are. I'd like to see that. I invited Thames Water in my letter to come down. I would take them around and show them all these little shops that are very meaningful and make wonderful businesses for families that did not have an opportunity to trade during the lockdowns. And then this happens just as they're beginning to recover a little bit. And so, it isn't just about residents. It isn't just about people with houses and flats and all of that. It's about businesses. And they are the lifeblood of our area. And that's what I wanted to say. And I'm angry because I was treated like nothing. My tenants have been treated like nothing. And everybody on the street was so glad to see me because I actually went around and asked them.
Thank you.
Again, a common theme. I can only say sorry for how you've been treated. I will come and, if I can have your details, I'm happy to come out and explain the drainage system as we understand it around there.
I don't understand the subsidiary business. I don't understand why my tenants have a different water supplier when, how can it be a different water supplier? It's coming in the same place. We share the same water. We share the same drain. Why isn't Thames Water taking responsibility for shops?
Yeah, so this is one of those sort of it's the Thames Water's business customers were sold some time ago to other parties.
Well,
I'm not, we need to come out and see you and explain what you asked. So we'll do that.
I would love that. I would love the opportunity and then share it with all my neighbors. And everybody as well, because there's a lot of questions that people are just beginning to formulate in their minds, because one thing is impacting on another, and it's one knock-on event after another knock-on event. And this has to be looked at in the whole, and also for the future. And I had a temporary flat for a little while in Hammersmith Grove, where a flip was installed. And at the time I thought to myself, what is this flip? And if you put a flip in this building, then the neighbor, if they don't have a flip, is going to get more water. And I kept thinking, why? There's some here, but not here. And that also puzzles me. There's a lot of things that puzzle me because I don't think we're looking at it properly. Just my opinion.
The lady there.
Hello, it's Fiona Fleming-Brown here. I live on a communal garden, and so it's a garden with a natural large floodplain. So even people who were flooded in 2007 didn't experience anything like the flooding that they experienced this time. They had flooding from the back, which was rainwater, and flooding from the front, which was sewage water. We had a meeting for residents yesterday, so 200 people live in my square. They were absolutely horrified to learn that the value of their property will be affected because they are now all in a flood risk area. They were horrified to learn how their buildings insurance will rise, because it isn't just people living in basements, the unfortunate people that you've heard tonight. It's everybody in a shared house because it's a collective expenditure. So when the word gets out, the number of people in the borough who will actually be affected, it will become a massive issue for Thames Water. At the moment, you're dealing with angry and traumatized people who've been flooded. You're soon going to be dealing with an entire borough in some areas of angry people. And one of the questions that I have, and I don't know if this is properly addressed to Ofwat or to the Royal Borough, is many residents have gathered evidence. They have evidence from their iPhones or things that they've witnessed. Where is the central repository for this to be placed? Because we need to gather as a community the evidence, and we need to present it. So if it's to go to a councillor or if it's to go to the chair of the inquiry, we need to know that. And I do second what other people have said, despite the fact of conducting quite an extensive correspondence with Mr. Mayhew's office, and I'm one of the lucky people who has received responses. I've heard nothing about the questionnaire. I would have circulated it to all my neighbours, and I will circulate it now. But this needs publicising. It needs to be put in an online form and sent out widely to representative organisations. This borough is rich in representative organisations. There are tenants, residents associations, conservation area societies. And it is essential that all those people are asked for their information, they're asked for their evidence. And I see no willingness on the part of Thames Water to actually make a purposeful effort to get that evidence.
Okay. I'll let him, I'll call you next, but
I'll be really quick.
Mr. Mayhew wishes to answer.
Yes, yes, we will. I think one of the, if it's all right, Chair, there feels like an action to make sure that we, if we can, use the offices that you have in terms of amplifying and sending messages out to get that questionnaire out. Because if you're talking about 200 people, then that's a lot of information, important information and data that will really, really help. So we're very keen to work with the council to make sure that we can get that information out in the best possible way.
Yeah, can I just say, anyone who has spoken but not registered with us to speak, if you'd like to leave your details on the way out, then we can kind of join up all the dots that way. Okay, the gentleman at the back.
Hello, my name is Kumar Devadasan. I live at 159 Holland Park Avenue, basement flat, and this is a challenge to George Mayhew. You are responsible to prevent hydraulic flooding as admitted by yourselves in the Westminster open meeting, and it's recorded in select committee in Parliament. So if you are not responsible to prevent hydraulic flooding of sewage and water being expelled from drains in houses and flooding those premises, who is?
As I said earlier, our responsibilities are to obviously operate and maintain both the water and waste network. If either of the networks, if there's a failure in terms of the assets, then that's on us. But as I said at the beginning, our assets during that storm performed, we believe, as they were designed to perform. Now that's part of the review that will take place. There will be an independent view. Was that the case? But we believe our initial assessment is that is the case.
Mr. Mayhew, I have precipitation, tidal data, tidal timing, which actually says that the 25th of July had a higher amount of rainfall intensity, higher tides, the right timing, and there was no hydraulic flooding.
In this borough, in the streets, the intensity was greater on the 12th than it was on the 25th, and on both days there was a high tide. Again, the independent. So that's our view, and that's what I'm sticking to. But the independent review will look at all that weather data and will do its own analysis, and it will also look at the impact that the high tide on both those days had.
I have shared those data with others here in the council, and I don't know where you got yours from. It seems to be very subjective onto Thames Water's personal precipitation. I've used the Met Office and secondary data collection points.
All our data on weather comes from the Met Office.
Lady there, and then the lady there.
Thank you. Just a quick question. While you're doing your survey, which takes some time,
Why don't we have a massive capital expense and go to every single home in the borough and offer them the flip valve? And then, if that's not the solution long-term, it's at least a short-term solution so that people can sleep at night. Why don't we just have everybody get a flip valve immediately?
As we said before, the installation of flip valves needs to be considered as a whole. We can't afford to go and install a load of flip valves and then have the water end up getting pushed elsewhere and flooding other people.
Yes, but that's the whole point, is that we know it works short-term, and it may not be your long-term solution. You may end up doing this whole Counters Creek thing or some other major thing. But in the short term, we know it works. And if your neighbor has one and you don't have one, and you can't get insurance on your property now because you don't have a flip valve and it's in a flood zone, we need a solution now. And there should be Thames Water people all over this borough installing those flip valves in every single person's home. And then if you do your big review and sometime in the future you have a bigger solution, maybe they all can come out. But in the meantime, they work, and we could have our properties back until you make a better long-term solution.
I know two houses in my road, Royal Crescent, where after the 2007 floods, two different families, one with a barrister, one with not, made merry hell with Thames Water and got what they wanted. The other was a flip valve. So that
it shouldn't be just who makes noise.
Yeah.
And I filled out one of those forms, and I got an answer back, no, you're not going to be entitled to one. So I went through the whole process and called people and talked to everybody, and no, you're not going to get one. Okay. It shouldn't be that way. It should be everybody should have one, as a matter of course, as a matter of the charge that we get paid, that we pay for Thames Water. We're in a flood zone, you get a flip valve.
One comment. If you don't do that, I think we should switch the pumps on the other properties that have the flipped valve, because it's unfair that our properties will be flooded when other people are pumping to us. So I think either flip, a flip for everyone, or switch off the flip for the people who've got it. I'm sorry, but otherwise it's not fair.
I need to come back to you, Mr. Mayhew. You've tried very bravely to convince us that it was an act of God on the 12th that caused the immense damage to our homes, which most of us are not insured for. So my outgoings so far have been £34,000. I got less than £4,000 from my insurance. That's one thing. You say you're not liable. Well, it's not up to you to decide whether Thames Water is not liable or not. It's up to a legal investigation to do that. So what you say is neither here nor there about that. Now, we have heard as a community of people that, and I'm a historian of Victorian England, so I know a lot about the building of the sewer, which was built in 1860, and which Thames Water has failed to expand sufficiently for a population that has doubled, trebled, quadrupled, and become 15-fold what that sewer was meant to be built to look after. So that's one thing. The second thing is that you have taken out, we've done research, all of us, we're all, to your misery, I think, literate people and can read and do our own research and not depend either on quangos or on offshore companies who have become outrageous monopolies. We have done our own research and discovered that Thames Water preferred, against advice, engineers' advice, they've preferred to take out insurance, and a lot of insurance, to meet claims, such as claims that will come to you, no doubt, from this room and from others in the borough, rather than improve the sewer system and the water system. An act of God may, according to you, explain the 12th, but it doesn't explain why I have been flooded on the 12th, the 25th, in 2007, in 2009, and again with sewage water. The rain is predictable. We've known about climate change for years. It's not something that happened on the 11th of July or the 11th of June or any such date.
That storm wasn't predictable, and it was proven by the fact that it wasn't predicted. In terms of your point about insurance, that I haven't heard that before. If you've got evidence of that, then please share it with me.
I think you should do your own research. It's there for everybody to see.
I haven't seen it, so if you have evidence, then please share it.
One point that you keep on repeating is that the assets have performed in line with what they were designed to do. You omit that the timing of activation of those assets was actually not the right one, because we heard that the pump in Lotts Road, given that it's still a manual pump in the 21st century, has not been activated at the right time to avoid part of the flooding. So the fact that the assets have performed in line with what they're designed to do has nothing to do with the fact that they were not activated to perform, or they were activated too late. Point number one. So I'm not quite sure there you are completely, out of the water when it comes to a legal challenge, which is not my job to do here. Just to reinforce the point. The second one is that you keep on asking us to fill up a form. We will be forgiven for not taking that request seriously, because all of us have been writing to you repeatedly and never heard back. So to try and scour your website to find a form that most likely is not going to achieve anything, because first of all, if you were so keen for us to provide that form, someone tonight should have put around like a picture of a link that would make everybody's life super easy to just go home and do it tonight, because it's such a critical piece of information you guys need to gather. While in fact you keep on referring, go to our website, find a link, there is a form there, it's going to be so useful. People have been covering you with letters and didn't get a reply. So please, can you give us the link? Can someone tell us exactly what is the form that we need to fill up? Because I can assure you everybody's going to do it, because we all want a flip. And when you say putting a flip valve is not going to solve the problem because someone else will be flooded, you are already living in a reality where some have it and some not, while you were managing the process. So you have already taken the wrong decision in the past. Why do you want to continue to replicate it?
So on the form, we'll get you the link. We'll need to work through the chair in terms of the best way to do that, but we'll get it.
We could put it up here tonight, so we go home with it, could we? It's so much easier.
Do you even know the link? Do you know that form?
Then we just go home with it.
I'm sorry, I think I'm going back to you about the forms. You have to also educate your staff about the form. We have continuously asked them to tell us what forms we have to fill out. Your staff doesn't even know what to do, and they don't give us the information. So from the educational point of view, you have an obligation to train your staff as well than coming here and just telling us to fill out a form.
Which, by the way, not even you know where it is. It sounds like.
Can I just come in here? I'm really concerned that the residents in the room have been able to find this form online, but many of our residents who were affected by the flooding are very vulnerable and may not have access to online forms. So I really think you need to reconsider how you're going to consult with people who've been badly affected.
Can you also please answer the woman's question about the flip valves, her second question, which you didn't answer? Pal had a question about that.
Yeah, so, well, there's a few questions I didn't answer. So the first one was around the assets, how they performed, Lots Road. As I said, that we've told you our initial view, but as I said already, the severity of the events, the impact it's had on you and many others, this is why we're having an independent view, so we can get objective view of how it performed. I think me sitting here saying, hey, it will perform well, you're not believing me, which is why we need to do the independent review, where there are independent experts that will inform you how those assets handled the events on those 2 days. And again, in terms of the flip, we absolutely haven't ruled them out. What we've said is that we need to look at them again. The review needs to consider the performance of the flips, those properties that didn't, the original Counters Creek proposal, do that modelling and come up with the right kind of solution that could well include more flips. But I don't want to get in front of the review.
I tried to apply for flip. I have been refused a flip repeatedly. So while you think I get flooded, and not only I got the damage because the basement has been a total write-off, I have also to pay very expensive rent because I had to relocate my son who was living in the basement. So I have insurance payments through the roof, the value of the property is going down, I have to pay expensive rent because I can only let you imagine where the rents went in our area, given that so many people had to relocate and find short-term rents. So it's £2,000 a month, which is a shocker. And when I ask for a flip, I get declined by your fabulous website because I'm not eligible, on which basis I don't know. But I'm encouraged that you think that perhaps there is a problem here and we should be allowed to have flips.
Yes, if you'd like to say something.
Yes, I would. I'm Helen Merlis and I live in Royal Crescent, and I've got an observation and a question. The observation is that on Friday I went to the funeral of my downstairs neighbour who died a fortnight ago of COPD. She lived in the basement and she lay in bed as the water came up round it. She was already ill, but she didn't want to be disturbed, she didn't want to move, she didn't want the insurance company to clear her out and dry her out because she'd had enough. And that was a very sad thing for many of us because she was in Royal Crescent before we moved there in 1977. And this is the end of trauma that people have been living with. We weren't even in the Crescent when the storm happened. We've been dealing with the aftermath, and it's a very sad business. So that's my observation. I have a question because I'm a practical soul, and I'm interested in how much it costs to put in a flip, a ballpark cost. I appreciate it can vary quite a lot. And I'm also interested, given that we live in a world where we talk about business models and supply chains, and I was a management consultant for 30 years, so I'm kind of used to this sort of thing. And I'd just be interested in what the supply issues are likely to be for Thames Water. If you look at the kind of requests people are putting in to put in a flip valve, so how much is it likely to cost? Can you access the product, and have you got the resources to put them in with reasonable speed? I appreciate you can't magic these things overnight, and they take planning, and you need sound evidence before you do it. but I think that practical information might be helpful to us. Thank you.
Okay, so starting off with the average cost in Council Creek was around £130,000 per property for each flip. In terms of the supply chain, the device we actually use comes from Europe. It's a German product. £130,000 per property.
130.
It cost us £130,000 to install on average in Counters Creek. A lot of it is to do with the actual construction, trying to put it into installation.
Can you clarify that? You're saying that for each flip?
We had a quotation, 40,000.
Correct.
It's 30 to 40,000. I think
35
most
to
people have had
40.
this number.
100, in AMP6, it was 127,000 for each one, so 130,000.
So not
How
cheap.
come we get that quotation for 30 to 40,000 from people who are working for Thames Water or recognise?
I can't comment where they're coming
we
from,
can
but-
pass this information. It's 30 to 40,000.
We have to deal with the mouse now that's coming out, all these rats.
That's the cost from the contractor who's installing them during AMP6, 127,000.
So isn't it, that's why you don't want to do it, because it's 130,000 for every property.
So that makes me think that the really expensive widening the sewer isn't really, comparatively, it's not that expensive if every house that you put a flip in is going to be £130,000.
Yes, but he said that they looked at the modeling and that Counters Creek wouldn't have solved the problem. That in fact, had they done the Counters Creek, it wouldn't have been beneficial over having all the flip valves. The reason they're not putting the flip valves in is because it's expensive.
I'm not sure that is proven.
And only the expensive properties are getting those flip valves.
But is that proven?
Thames Water can afford it if you got shares like Dubai and China.
What are your profits?
Okay. Holly, do you wish to ask your question, or shall I ask your question for you? Holly has asked for a map of all the area that are flooded, both in K&C and I think also a similar one in Westminster. So, Patricia, would that be possible to be able to give the map that you showed up there, pass it?
Sorry, I cannot connect it. It needs to be...
No, it doesn't matter. Not for now, but
yeah, sure.
you can get, we'll get you a copy of the map. So I have actually kept the members of the committee have not said anything. They've been sitting there very patiently. So if you will allow me, I will start, and to say a lot of them, I will start with the ones who had a lot of flooding in their area. And so I'll go to David first.
Marie-Therese, thank you. Having been a councillor for 20 years, I've been seen so many once-in-a-lifetime events that actually, with all respect, George, I predict there will be even worse floods in the future. I just can't say when they will be, but I absolutely assure you there will be some, and you need to factor that into your modelling. But I now want to read out a letter that was sent to me late last night, or this morning. The key outcome I would like to see is Thames Water agreeing to flip devices to those properties without them. I've written directly to Thames Water asking them to fit one to my property, but they claim there is no evidence of their effectiveness. However, as you may be aware, of the 35 houses on Queensdale Road and adjoining parts of Norland Square, of the 11 houses with flip valves, none were flooded. Of the 19 without flip valves, 17 were flooded. The likelihood of this distribution of flooding happening by chance is less than 1 in 1,000. With climate change, we can expect similar extreme days on a much more frequent basis. Thames Water are therefore knowingly leaving their customers vulnerable to flooding, particularly given their abandonment of the Counters Creek flood alleviation scheme. One final point is that Norland area is now a high-risk area for flooding, and my house insurance quote renewal has now doubled following the flooding in June. To make some other points briefly, I think many people will expect in their life to be flooded once, but please, please, please not sewage And it would be really good if Sarah Bentley, as your chief executive, could come here to my ward and I will willingly take around some of the houses that have been flooded with sewage. It is quite disgusting. To go back to the imperative for flip devices, yes, they are essential. But if everyone has one, the reality is that you have a contingent liability on your balance sheet that will make Thames Water a questionable going concern. And please can you note that down, Ofwat? Or you could increase capacity. It's either or, as points were made earlier on there. And very briefly, could we please have ongoing future meetings like this one as we had a decade ago when some of your equally senior colleagues, possibly even more senior, I seem to recall a chairman and a chief executive coming to the initial ones. If we could have such meetings on an ongoing basis until they're no longer needed, so that all residents' points have been suitably raised, that would be very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lindsay. First thing is, I do agree with you. Climate change is real, it's happening, and these extreme events that happen every one in however many hundred years seem to be happening with increasing frequency. And the storms in July, and we had a few others during the summer elsewhere in this borough and also across London, only go to show that we need to fix the solution. But like I said, we need to do it properly, and we need to get all the data in. We need to understand the flow of water down the catchment and make sure that we have the best possible solutions. I think the solution, well, the independent review will point to the solutions, but I don't think they're either or. They could be both, but let's wait to see what they come out with. And then, you know, we're more than happy to continue meeting you whenever you want. And, you know, obviously at some point, the findings of the review will need to be shared with this group and those residents who aren't present.
Mo, back to you.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to go back to a point that you have raised and one of our residents raised through you, sent you a question, which is 4.5 in the report. I have attended a consultation a few years ago about the storm relief sewer, and I was impressed, and I was expecting it to be implemented, but it was withdrawn in 2018. I know you've tried to answer this question, but could you make it clear why it was withdrawn, why it was dropped, and would it prevent it, if that system was in place, would it prevent this flood, this damage?
The reason it was withdrawn was because essentially we could not solve all the properties in the area. We were finding that the tunnel wasn't effective. It's quite a large catchment. Being able to draw the flows down to the tunnel, we were finding wasn't particularly effective, and hence we went for the flips. If we'd relied just on the tunnel, and I'll make this clear, the flooding would have been worse than without the flips, quite simply. The tunnel was not the right solution in the end for this particular problem.
We should expect more of this in the future.
Can I just jump in here? If, you know, there are obviously arguments for and against the flips, and they're very expensive. But if overall the reason and the problem is a lack of capacity, surely the answer, and I'm not saying build the old one, but surely the answer has to be to increase capacity, because these events, once in a lifetime, whatever event, we all know, we can see what's going on in New York, in Germany. I mean, these events are getting more and more frequent, and if capacity is the problem, then the answer has to be capacity as well, surely.
Can I answer that first? First of all, when we talk about capacity, okay, so if we designed a capacity, put capacity in for the storm that happened on the 20th of July, we've already alluded to, there'll be a bigger storm around the corner. The point is the capacity, it keeps snowballing. The way to actually start to manage this is to work with other risk management authorities, try and understand where the surface water is coming on the surface, and start to try and control it at source. One of the problems that has happened a lot in London, and it was alluded to by the lady at the back, is London has become more concreted over time. Many years ago, it was much more green space. That green space used to absorb a lot of the rainfall. The problem has actually snowballed. If you're going to find a permanent solution to this particular problem, my view, and this is my view, and this is, we've got the expert panels to comment, is that we've got to start looking at how the rainfall falls onto the catchment and manage the rainfall more effectively at source, because quite simply making bigger pipes, you're going to put it out to the River Thames or you're going to send it to the treatment works. Those are going to have implications further down the line. So it's going to take all authorities that are involved in flood management to work together, and that's what I would hope would come out of this, to actually try and manage surface water on the surface, but to make sure it doesn't get into properties.
Will.
Thank you, Chair. Many residents who are here who have spoken, and many have suffered. Will Ofwat hold Thames Water for their duty to maintain capacity in the one-pipe system that we have? And can they clarify Thames Water liability for non-performance in relation to damages? Will Ofwat ensure that Thames Water Assurance 6 months review will be made public before the 12th of January? Because a 6 months review from the flood on the 12th of July equals the 12th of January. And if that's not the correct date, can we have a public statement now as to when the 6 months review will be available in public? Will Ofwat ensure that the long overdue review will take full account of climate change, major developments in the pipeline, both in this borough and in particularly in Hammersmith and Fulham? Will Ofwat ensure sufficient investment in infrastructure capacity and public timescale of that, make public the timescale of that necessity?
Well, we're absolutely focused on holding Thames to account for its performance. We've done that through many ways. We do it through our kind of the performance commitments, and Thames has penalised £50 million in the last year for failure to meet those commitments. In 2018, we also penalised Thames £120 million for failure on leakage. So we absolutely will take action where there is clear evidence of that. We are very focused on this review taking place speedily, being comprehensive and transparent in its process. We also very much are encouraging Thames to, through the independent review, to be reporting as the review actually progresses, so that it's not just sort of waiting for the end result, because I think there are reports that come out sequentially through the period of that. We are on the stakeholder group for that review. We were paying close attention to exactly how it performs and what the answers are, both for the short-term solutions and the long-term solutions here. And if we're not satisfied, we are absolutely ready to take further action as the regulator.
Thank you. Yes, George Mayhew.
Just a couple of supplements. One is, could we have a date, please, now, today, on record, as to when this review will be ready, without any ifs and buts and excuses or maybes or wherefores? This needs to be project managed backwards to achieve the date that is stated today, so that there won't be prevarication because somebody was ill, or the internet didn't work, or there was another flood, or we were too busy and we were replying to residents who wanted to be replied to. And that another point is that if £50 million has been levied from Thames Water, could some of that not go towards sorting out the basements where people can't actually live, and also to pay for the costs of their temporary residence in the meantime?
I think it's probably for Thames Water to give you what certainty they can about the timescales for the review, so I'll allow them to do that. With regard to penalties that have been imposed on Thames historically, the principal way that works is typically that money goes back to customers, and it goes back to customers in the form of bill increases foregone, i.e. bills that bill levels that would otherwise have increased don't increase to the same extent as they would. So it's not a case of saying that a penalty has been imposed and that should be used for a particular purpose. There are instances where we can, following enforcement action, impose direct financial penalties on a company. In those instances, actually, the fine revenues go directly to the Treasury, and we have no control over how that is, how those funds are used.
My husband and I have just looked at the form. Sorry, I have a question for you. We've just reviewed the form, and this is for off-lot. Question number 2, which gathers the information about where the water actually comes from a flood, only gives you one option, okay? We had water coming from 4 different sources in our property. I think there's a problem with the form. If this is like a mission-critical form that has to be filled out to give you all of the relevant information, if it's only giving you one option, they're not gathering the right information.
Okay. Yeah.
Can I just, so first of all, the date. So 6 months, they had their first meeting at the end of September, so it will be spring, but I think they're aiming for end of April. I think they're aiming for end of April, but it is an independent review, so that's the target date, 6 months from September. Sorry?
September.
I think April, is it? I don't know, I think it's 6 months. And then in terms of the form, I'm looking at it here, and it says, where did the flooding come from? And there's quite a lot of options, so and it's just...
If you try to choose multiple sources, you're only allowed to choose one. And we had water coming from 4 different places.
So did I.
Well, if that's the case, it's ridiculous. Not what you said, what this is doing. So we'll look at that straight away. But it does give the options, and they should be able to put down as many as you want.
I'm going to go to Councillor Ali and then Councillor Hammond. Councillor Ali first, and then Councillor Hammond.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the residents who've been here this evening with us. And it's unfortunate that these events that's been happening since 2007, 2008, 2009 and onwards, no one has been taking care of and listening to the residents' needs for all this time. We know the effect, we've been talking about the effect of the flooding and how it's destroyed the lives, and my condolences to you and your neighbor and her family who passed away. One thing I would like to raise is 2 questions with you specifically that I had from residents who live in two of the wards, that's Nottingdale and Goulburn, that has been flooded. Children who've been going through a lot from Grenfell to COVID-19, who couldn't go to school, have now not able to go to their supplementary schools or late evening schools where they have support to be supported because it's been flooded. And what you've just told us now, which is to wait for 6 months to be reviewed and the inquiry, what shall I tell them when they contact me tomorrow? Will I say the Thames Water or whoever responsible, or the Thames Water said, wait, hold your lives for 6 more months, kids cannot learn, they cannot progress, and they will have to wait 6 months inquiry, and then they will be able to know what happens to their after-school club if there is the result of the flooding. And hopefully that also goes with the council, what we can do at the moment immediately to get their lives back for these children. This is to of what? Is Thames Water too big to be regulated? Because of this company and what's been happening now, and what we're hearing from our residents who, unlike, I'm assuming you have not been flooded, who are going back to this evening to their homes, which is uncomfortable, and the flooding issue is still ongoing on. Is this company too big to be controlled or regulated? If so, what can you do about it? If not, what's the responsibility of Thames, well, sort of what, if you cannot hold companies accountable? To scrutiny, I think this issue is ongoing and it's been coming up for some time. I think as a scrutiny, and we are in between the council leaders as well as the companies who are providing services to our residents. And I believe from now onwards, as Councillor Lenz has mentioned before, this is a scrutiny issue. We should be with our residents all the way, and 6 months is not good enough. And to say sorry, I somehow feel the number of times I heard sorry, it feels like this is a damage control meeting rather than actual supporting residents. So I would like the scrutiny sessions to be continued, if possible, every 4 weeks, to know the results and what has been done, rather than waiting 6 months and obviously this issue to be forgotten about it. And once again, I'm so sorry what you have gone through, and I hope this council will take responsibility and get this to issues to be resolved, whether it's children who've lost education through all the stuff we talked about, or the flooding, and they have nowhere to live at the moment. They're in temporary accommodations, and that breaks our hearts. Thank you very much, Council.
Councillor Hammond.
Thank you. Before I ask my questions, Councillor Addenbrooke gave a very good point earlier about the digitally excluded, and I didn't hear an answer from Thames Water about what you're doing to communicate with members of the public who are not on the internet. So I'll give you that opportunity now.
That's a great question, and I'll need to take it away and have a think about how we address that.
Okay, give us the answer tomorrow morning, please.
I may need a bit more time than that. I want to give you the proper answer. I don't want to knee-jerk.
All right. I'm pleased to hear that you found the form. Could we have the form displayed up on the... you just need to email the link to the council officers and they'll be able to put it up on the form so the people in the room can take it away. So if you could do that now while I'm asking my questions, that would be really helpful, please, for all those who want to take the link away. Now, I'm also, as well as being here in my own right, I'm also representing Felicity Buchan, MP for Kensington tonight, who's very unfortunately stuck in a meeting in Westminster. But she's texted me through a couple of questions which I'm going to put to you from her. And the first is this. She says, the independent review will take 6 months. There was more flooding last week in the constituency. What are you doing now to protect residents against flooding? And the implication or the inference I've drawn from the answers so far is nothing, which would be pretty pathetic, but perhaps you can correct that for me now. And the second question, as I'll do them both together, if the independent review concludes that major infrastructure investment is required, something like Counters Creek, will you commit to implementing that? Thank you.
In terms of what we're doing now, there was some flooding, I believe, earlier on a week or so ago. That flooding, I think, was principally surface water, so that may be a question that's better addressed towards the council. In terms of what we're doing, like I said, we have a number of measures that we need to put in place to make sure our responsiveness is much better in the event that these things happen. But in terms of the actual asset side of things, then that's back to the review again. The importance of having the independent review is that, like I said, it will be an independent group of experts that will be explaining what are the right kind of, why it happened, what could have been done about it, and what future measures that need to be put in place, addressing flips, addressing the original Counters Creek proposal. And then it's a matter of working with the regulator and other agencies to do the best possible, get the best possible solutions in. So we're not, just to reassure you, we see the events of the summer as a moment in time where the approach to flooding from Thames and the other agencies responsible need to look at doing things very, very differently. It was a monumental event, and it is one of those moments where you stop, pause, reflect, and act. So I can assure you, I don't want to be sat here in 10 years' time. Well, I won't be sat here 10 years' time if it happens again, because I won't be here. Things have to be different. Things have to change. The stories we've heard today are heart-rending, and action must be taken. But it needs to be taken in a considered way, so that what we do is done and will last for a good amount of time. And like I said, we're not sat here in a few years' time having the same conversation.
So we're on our own for the next 6 months, and then we're on our own until the independent review's recommendations are implemented.
Like I said, we will try and respond much better than we did before. But in terms of what we can do with our assets, the assets did what they were designed to do. The focus now has to be on what sort of assets do we need in the future to prevent these things from happening?
Okay, I'm grateful for your answers, and let's see the link up on the screen, please, as soon as you can.
Can we just take one positive step before we go home tonight and have that link on the screen? Nothing else needs to be done, just that.
Who is doing that?
Everyone seems to be evasive about
Councillor,
it.
Chairman.
Okay.
Chairman, can I get my questions answered, please, if you don't mind? Because I've asked the regulator if Thames Water too big to be regulated. That's the one thing I would like to know. Why the company is behaving such way was to say our residents, they have to wait. And children who've asked me if they cannot go to their place of studying in the evening, what can be done about it? They have gone through COVID-19 for 18 months. They're not in a position to go and improve their studies. What can they do? I would like to get some answers, please, so that I can go back to my residents and tell them what's happening.
No, absolutely not. They're not too big to be regulated, and we spend a huge amount of time putting pressure on Thames in terms of enforcing their licence. What we do need to do is to understand exactly what went on here. We need to understand what the solutions are and make sure those solutions are fit for the long term. We are extremely focused on that, and as part of the stakeholder group of this review, we'll be spending a lot of time scrutinising what comes out of this, making sure, as I said before, that is done speedily, the answers are fit for the residents and fit for the future, and making sure that investment goes in. That is something we're extremely focused on going forward.
Councillor Campbell.
Yeah, I'd just like to say two things. Number one, if the supplementary schools are in council property, I can certainly ask for Kim to see whether we can relocate them in the time being, but from what I can gather from the papers, they're not, but we'll certainly look into it. And the second thing I'd like to say, really picking up on what Councillor Hammond said, I absolutely appreciate that, you said 6 months, nothing can be done in the short term, but what sort of timescales are we talking about? Because, we have listened to residents tonight, and they really have suffered an awful lot. So say the report comes back in 6 months' time and says put in another sewer. How long does something like that take? Give people an idea, 10 years, 15 years? Because previously we had the floods in 2007, and then there was all the plans to do the sewer, which was turned down in 2018. So even if you'd done it in 2018, I guess, how long would that have taken? So what's time frame are we talking about here, realistically?
In terms of the original tunnel,
Yeah, say it comes back and says, you need a new sewer. How long does it take you usually to do it? 10 years, 15, 20? What's the kind of time frame for people to say that nothing will happen until X? What are we grasping? You said 10 years. Is it 10 years? Is it a generation? What is it?
if we were looking at a strategic sewer, you could be looking at the order of about 10 years. This is again why things like flips offer a better opportunity, because they're relatively quicker to implement. But we really do need to understand from the experts, was that the right approach? Did that provide the right level of protection?
I appreciate that, but just in general, something like that's a huge, big infrastructure project, right? So we're talking years and years and years and years.
Yes.
Yeah.
Potentially, yes, I'm afraid.
So actually what residents are saying is what's going to happen in the meantime is very relevant then, isn't it?
Okay.
Thank you.
Councillor El-Naghi.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for everyone who came here. Residents tried to give us some insight of what's happened at that night, and I was at that night up and running around. This is where we have some council officers almost at midnight try to place people in emergency accommodations on the 12th and the 13th. And thank you for your openness. We had quite good parameter setting of what you are capable, what you are doing in the short term. For one thing, which I would like to see a commitment of, is the just asking question directly regarding your communication strategy in emergencies, because what's upsetting me to some extent is the level of non-responses regarding communication. So if this can be sorted in the meantime, as a matter of emergency, coming to your executive committee, which you are going to have soon, surely there is a big failure there in terms of communication to start with. And then the other thing is building on that communication to include it in your performance, and surely to educate, especially what's happened, what I observed in Nottingdale ward in particular. 2 streets literally became like a small pond where the water, and I had some good input from residents on Ainsley Place, where that street almost flooded, affecting more than 20 properties on that street. So we need to see a presence, like a roadshow, to listen to residents firsthand and to see how can we do more or less like an impact study of what can be done in the mean term or in the short term. How can we avoid this is from, I mean, at least to lessen the impact on the residents of what's happening during this flooding, because can we guarantee this is not going to happen next month?
No.
Because it could. Exactly the same thing. So what do you have in terms of emergency procedures to press a button and to start the process immediately? I would like to see that properly formulated and relayed and shared with us, please. Thank you, Chair.
So in terms of the communications, and I'll broaden that out. So you've got the as I said at the beginning, our inability to respond fast enough through our call centres, and then there was some more broader communications challenges that I think you're alluding to. We don't need to wait. We don't need to have an independent review and wait 6 months to work out that there were a number of failings on that front. So what we've done is we've had a thorough look at our incident management process. We've learned a lot of lessons, and we have a report that is due out, I think it's in the next couple of weeks, that will address those immediate challenges in terms of what we need to do in terms of improving our communications response. And that will cover things like the telephony system, what we need to do with that. We have a new system going in, but the need to ensure that we have enough agents both trained and available to deal with these kinds of incidents, or at least do a better job than we did before. And also there were some understandable criticisms about on the ground presence. The slight issue, well, it's more than a slight issue. The issue we have there is we're not a first responder. We're not set up to be able to respond like an agency like the fire brigade, for example. When we have these incidents, our colleagues tend to be at the pumping stations and at the assets to make sure that they are working as they should. So our system is tied into the Met Office, so when we see weather coming through, we make sure we staff up and ensure those assets are working. But clearly, the Met Office predicted a lower level storm. We got caught out. We weren't quick enough. So how can we improve those processes? So we've got a report coming out in a couple of weeks that will address those, and we're happy to share those findings with you. And we plan to publish them so residents here and elsewhere that were impacted can see what we're doing.
Okay, Tarek wishes to speak, and then Marion, then I'll call.
Yeah, my question is to Elizabeth Campbell. We've heard people saying their premium's gone up. Someone like me, I'm a volunteer, I don't have a job, I can't afford a premium, I can't afford insurance. Since I was promised by Deputy Leader Kim Taylor-Smith that I'll get compensated and I'll get put in a place until they clean my house, that's back in 13th of July, nothing has happened. I'll fill out the form for your insurance and was told that's if RBKC approves it, it'll be end of October, July, August, September, 4 months.
Nothing.
I mean, I feel sorry for the ones who are paying insurance, they've gone up. You guys have millions. I've seen them spread around. You've just put £160,000 legacy fund for our estate to fill out a form to do something which we're not going to get approved for it. Who's going to compensate me? You're still asking me to fill out an insurance form and tell me, why didn't I get home content? I can't afford it. I'm raising 6 children alone in a 2-bedroom, overcrowded, and I sleep in that backyard. Councillor Qasim has been there. Councillor Marwan has been there. Robert Atkinson. Also, your colleagues come and hold meetings in my house because we don't have a centre, and it smells like damp and sewage, and you still neglect to put me anywhere or clean my house and compensate.
Tarek, I'm afraid I don't know
I think you'll have to
circumstances
take
you're
that.
talking of, but I can certainly, well, see Kim tomorrow, but I can't respond to you right now.
Yeah, we have to really take that offline, I think.
Yeah.
If you want to get Kim to have a look at it.
Okay. Can I come in later before you switch?
Yeah. And then I'll call Marion, I'm going to call Janet, and then I'm going to call Sarah. Marion.
These are a couple of suggestions to the council, which seem to that are particularly directed to Councillor Felicities. It's about what the one of the gentlemen from Thames Water just said about all other issues outside Thames Water's focus, and it seems to me, in an area like the centre of Portobello Road, the middle area, there's hardly a blade of grass, except in Portobello Court. There's nothing else. So the roads should be porous. The roadways can be built porous. We've got a massive gas main being relayed down Portobello Road this year, next year. Why don't they, when they replace it, and make a new road surface, put in porous roadways so that when the water that was coming down Portobello Road was not the problem, so particularly it was the water going across westwards from Lonsdale into Elgin. And it would make such a difference if some of that water disappeared into the earth. And finally, it will be a benefit in an area like Portobello Road, which is very low and was known in the 19th century as the swamp, to have those solid concrete traffic calming humps removed so the water can flow naturally instead of backing up and flooding all the premises around it. Each one of the junctions along that middle section of Portobello Road had exactly identical issues, and in my little bit, 10 properties each side of the road on the bit that was in front of me were flooded, up to a man's shoulder with sewage in the basements. It's incredible. And it could be helped by these different ways of laying roadways.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for those questions. I think you make a reasonable point in particular about trying to make sure that the road is not, when it's relayed with gas works and things, is not still vulnerable to flooding. It's something I'm happy to pick up and look at how we can work on the layout of the street, make it greener and more flood resistant. It may be something we can look at in terms of the public realm there. That's a helpful suggestion. I think on the points about traffic calming and road humps, I appreciate there'll be a range of views in the room about the efficacy of traffic calming and of road humps, but it's not my view that traffic humps make flooding worse. That's not the evidence that we've had, and it's not the advice we're getting from officers. So there's an extent to which we do need to try and bridge that gap and better understand what you're describing to make sure that if that is the case, we can evidence it. But I know that in every circumstance where we put in traffic calming, we always consult fully. We seek to go with what the majority of residents in the vast majority of cases want. So I'm happy to go back through that consultation and make sure that it's still consistent with the wishes of residents. But I can certainly understand why it was introduced, and hopefully it's something that over time we can still look at mitigating flooding in the area. I think we've also got...
just say we've printed out Thames Water's
forms.
Flooding questionnaires, so that people can fill them out tonight if they wish before they go home.
Here we go. Should we?
There we are,
should we
that's
start
very
handing them
good.
out?
So we've got them here. Marion, if you, yeah, if you
Yeah,
can be
I'll be
brief.
very brief.
Yeah.
It's just, councillor, you could, you know, if people want the humps, I mean, I witnessed it. If people want the humps, then make them porous. You know, the engineering must exist to make that so that I don't have to sit and watch the water coming into the shop and doing, you know, another £20,000 worth of damage.
I know.
It's extraordinary.
Councillor Evans, you wish to speak?
I have to say I'm totally shocked at what I'm hearing tonight. I think this is a utility company that's not living up to their statutory duty to the residents and to the area. And to say no one responds at night, I mean, what is that? It's totally unacceptable. And I've seen it with my residents when they've had floods and called up. One of my residents was resourceful and called the CEO of the company and got a response that night. People should not have to deal with this. It's your responsibility to do this. And you've been running the company with Band-Aid solutions for years, and it's not acceptable anymore. You can run it, but you, with having some more foresight, who's doing your research? Why didn't you have any forward planning? What are you putting your money into? I don't understand what's going on with the company, and I have to say it's really letting our residents down, and it's not to be acceptable. Just to wait for a 6-month review and then another one and another one. You need, from the top down, a total philosophical change at your company. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet.
So that's a great statement, and I completely agree with you, Councillor. Thames Water for too many years has not been providing the service that our customers and your residents deserve. And I'm not going to argue with that, I'm going to agree with you with that. I won't give you a history lesson because I know there are other questions, but the shareholders have changed, the board has changed, the chairman's changed, the chief exec's changed, the leadership team has changed. The majority of the 7,000 colleagues I have been working hard despite, to be honest, a historical leadership that hasn't been up to scratch. We have a new CEO, as some of you have referenced. One of the things that Sarah and the new leadership team, which I'm part, have done, is that we have got under, we've lifted the covers to look at just what is the extent of the challenges that Thames Water has. They are significant, and you've alluded to them, a number of them already. We have launched a couple of, about 3 or 4 months ago, what we call our turnaround plan, which is about how we address over the coming years the performance issues that we have at the company. We are in a turnaround situation. For those of you who've been involved in turnaround plans in other organisations, they usually take a year, 2 years. The challenges at Thames Water are so deep, it will be 8 years for us to turn the business around. Doesn't mean to say that it will take until 8 years to see any improvement, but it will take that period of time for us to be able to make sure that we're in a position where we're providing your residents and our customers the service that they deserve. So I'm not going to sit here and defend the indefensible. What you said is pretty much spot on, and I can assure you the same things have been said around the leadership table, which is why we've made the changes we've changed. I'm conscious that's talk, and we need to act, but like I said, it is going to take a period of time for us to turn this business around, but turn it around we will.
Do you wish to say anything, Councillor Addenbrooke? And then I'll
Thank you,
take
Chair.
a couple of more questions.
I think Councillor Campbell touched on the timing issue earlier, and you know it's very clear from everything that's been said tonight that any solution or solutions is going to be years away. So what can you propose that can be implemented now to perhaps mitigate another devastating flood?
there's nothing we can do that stops if we have that level of intensity. It overwhelmed the highway systems and our systems, and they have not been designed to cope with that level of storm. And that's the harsh reality of it. What we are doing, though, is with our sewer networks, as you know, we have a program to make sure that we keep them unblocked. It's a big program of activity. One of the things that we do, and we're increasing this as we speak, is installing what we call more sewer depth monitors. And what they do is they can tell if our sewers are filling up unusually quickly because there may be a blockage. By installing those, we're able to find out where we have blockages. So in addition to the program of activity that we would do anyway, we're actually able to be much more targeted and flush those blockages out where those monitors are in place. So those monitors are being put in as we speak, and they will help. But will they help in the case of the intensity of storm we had the other day? That rainfall completely overwhelmed our sewers. It overwhelmed the drainage network. So that's why we need to come up with longer-term solutions to fix this problem.
Okay. The lady, and then okay.
Thank you very much.
Just
I think. Sorry.
Just add to that. There's two distinct sort of mechanisms of flooding. There's one where it comes up through the toilet and you're in your basement property, and there's another one that comes over land. Now, the one we've talked about is a flip. Why we like a flip is because it's a pump, so it continues your service. In terms of mitigation, one of the things we can look at is we can look at what we call non-return valves.
Oh, okay? I was going to ask you about
this. There you are.
Because basically, out of desperation, as you could imagine, we're trying to protect our properties. We can't get insurance, we can't fit, we are, practically speaking, we've heard nothing could be done or not even a plan for 6 months. If we're going to implement anything, it will take 10 years. So now there are companies where they are offering something called non-returnable valves. They're expensive, they're not as expensive as the flip device. Do you think they're worthwhile as a temporary measure to try to do something?
I think, as I started, if it's coming up through the pipe that's connecting, so it's coming up into your basement property, it's a potential solution. The one it won't rule out is if it's going over land. So potentially, given the sort of type of flooding mechanism, it is something we can look at as a short-term measure to give some respite whilst we try and work out what the appropriate solution is.
I'm glad you've said this because we're just committing to a few £1,000s for that.
Okay, take a question there, and then I think I might draw things to a close.
I hate to go back to it, but I still haven't heard a date.
I think
6 months is the end of March from the end of September. But we're talking about April. Is this the beginning of 6 months becoming 7 months, becoming 8 months, or do we have a date? Or do we not have a commitment on the time? We either have a commitment on the time and we have a date, or we don't have a commitment on the time and we don't have a date. So can we have a clarification of which you're giving now?
It's going to be 6 months. So we're actually putting the press release out next week, I think, on it. But it will be the internal date that we have is end of April. Like I said, the thing that I've just been really careful about is this is an independent review, and this isn't a Thames Water review, and that's the strength of it. But we want it done in 6 months. That was the intention, and we hope that it will be done within that period of time.
But end of April is a target, is a 7 months target for a target of 6 months review. So this is double speak. We need to have some clarity. If you engineer when you're going to open a school so the children can go back at the beginning of the term, you drive the critical path program backwards and give yourself a bit of contingency plan into that, and then you get it there on time, including getting all the staff and desks and all the rest of it, which all the detail and desiderata that you're going to have to face in this context of getting things printed, people being ill, and all the rest of it. So an organisation such as yours, if it has an emergency plan, it will be able to do it if you wish to. But if you don't wish to and you can't commit, don't tell us 6 months. Say we'll do it as quickly as we can.
One or the other, please.
I'm telling you, the plan is end of April. But
That's,
like I'm saying,
7 months by any... 7 months, everybody?
well, then, maths was never my strong point. So it's end of April is when the review is we hope it will be concluded. We've asked the team that have just been put in place to finish it within 6 months. That's what we hope. It's an independent review, and you know they're an independent review, but we expect it to be 6 months.
Two things. First of all, that's 9.5 months from when the problem occurred. And secondly, will it be public in April, or will it just be an internal report which you'll sit on for 6 months and debate whether you can actually deal with the consequences of it?
So two things. We hope that during the course of the 6 months there will be updates that can be shared publicly, and when the report is finished, the independent review panel will publish it to all of you, the residents, our customers, on when it's done. We will not be sitting on anything for 6 months. We will be waiting for it like you will be.
And we'll witness what's been said today and insist it happens and apply pressure to make sure it does happen in a due time.
Okay. I'm going to take one more question and then I'm going to bring things to a close.
I'd just like to say what an absolute shower Thames Water had been tonight. I mean, look at that debacle over your form, and you yourself denigrating your own form. And here we are hearing people that it doesn't work, it doesn't give them any answers. And we didn't hear about the form until I asked the first question. Getting information out of you guys is like getting blood out of a stone. We've just heard about non-return valves as being an option. You never volunteered that, did you? It's absolutely obvious to me that the independent review has no value unless the people conducting that review come here and hear the residents. Because for sure they hear from you guys. But will they hear from us? I don't want an independent review delivered to this table without the input of the residents.
Okay.
Because it will have no value and will not be acceptable in the court of law because it has not had the proper input from those people who are affected. So will the independent review people come here and listen to what's being said by these people and others?
Is it possible that the people who are writing the review would meet with residents here?
What I'll do, because it's their call, but I will do exactly what I did after we had a similar meeting in one of your neighbouring councils. I will go to the chair. First of all, the chair will be seeing, the panel will be seeing this debate, so they'll hear your comments, but I will go back and I will express your views very clearly that, well, what you just said in terms of you want to address them yourselves. I have absolutely no problem sharing that information with them, both directly and through the powers of the video. No problem with that at all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I would like, Offroad, if you would like to make some comment on what you have heard here tonight, and then I'm going to bring the meeting to a close. I'll ask Councillor Campbell to talk as well, but if you'd like to say something about what you've heard in all tonight.
Yes, I mean, thank you again for inviting us here. I mean, incredibly sobering to hear the truly devastating stories of what's happened in people's lives. We, you know, as the regulator of Thames and the whole sector, you know, these are the real consequences of failure. We have to take really sort of careful consideration of exactly how that works through into our regulatory system. As I said before, I think what we really want to make sure we see is that this independent review is carried out thoroughly in a really sort of detailed way that comes up with proper solutions that are fit for the future and fit for the residents here. That's what we're going to be focused on in our role in sitting on the stakeholder group and as the regulator discussing it with Thames. And I think also it's worth saying, I think, you know, there are two things here. One is what is the sort of overall long-term solution, and I've said before, we weren't happy with what we saw in the price review about the explanation about Counters Creek. But I do think also that review has to look at whether there are temporary measures, whether there are things that should be done in the more immediate term to alleviate the risk, even if there are longer term solutions. So that's something that we'll be putting pressure on Thames on over the course of the duration of this review and going forward. As George has said, Thames is a company in turnaround. It is a company that has had a lot of problems. We are, again, extremely focused on that performance as well, and making sure that overall the company is fit for London and fit for the whole of the representing the capital city.
Thank you. Councillor Thalasitis and Councillor Campbell, do you both?
I'll just be very quick. I'd just like to say thank you to all the residents who've come tonight. You know, it's dark, it's late. I really appreciate you coming, because actually for Thames Water and for Ofwat to hear of your experience, it's different when you read it on paper, isn't it? It's completely different. And having been out on the night of the flood myself and been in a room trying to get people into hotels because we couldn't get through to anybody, etc., I'm very pleased that Ofwat and Thames Water have come tonight, and I'd like to thank them for coming and for answering questions as best you can. Some questions are yet to be answered, and I'd just like to say to our residents, after the independent inquiry that you set up comes to its conclusion, we as a council will be doing a section, it's called Section 19 investigation into what is proposed and what's happened as well. So thank you all very much for coming, both residents, Ofwat and Thames Water. But as you've just said, we really need to find some solution in the immediate term, because the long term really is quite long term, and it is all about, you know, the climate warming.
Elizabeth, could you please ask the council to commit to Councillor Ali's suggestion of monthly scrutiny meetings so that we are not abandoned?
I'm afraid that's for the chair.
I'm going to,
Hand
yes.
that over to you.
So I'm just about to also say thank you to all of you for coming. Heart-rending stories. I think that flood had a really appalling effect on so many of our residents. And I have to say that in the short term, we would like a date from you for the publication of that report. I think we would like some money to try and sort out the problems we've got. I think regular meetings, maybe not monthly, but regular meetings would be something I would ask for. But also I'd like to ask for a commitment, because the whole idea that the assets did what they were designed to do, yes, but they were completely inadequate for the task in hand. And climate change is with us, and we know that. And I sit here and you want to say, oh, this will never happen again. But all of us sitting here are thinking, well, there could be another one. And we all know that these big infrastructure, you know, whether it's the Counters Creek, the old scheme, or a new one, but whatever it is, they take tons of money, but also, you know, loads and loads of time. So really I want a commitment that there will be some kind of infrastructure solution to this, because I can't see anything else actually working. I mean, I'm not sure if you put flips at £130,000 each in every house in the borough, that you still wouldn't get floods, not with the kind of monsoons that we're getting now. So the solution has to fit the task in hand, even if it's bigger and getting bigger, if you see what I mean. Yeah, if you want to answer me, yeah, that's fine.
Well, first of all, thank you for your questions, and as I said, I will make sure what you've said has been shared with my colleagues and also with the independent review panel. In terms of what you've just said, I completely agree. Climate change is real, it's happening, we've seen it, you've been impacted by it in the most awful way, and out of this there has to be some change, and that change, like I said, the review will determine what the best thing is, but it's, you know, it has to be elements around infrastructure, elements around flips, elements around sustainable drainage that some of the audience referred to, holistic solutions that will ensure that we're all protected from these increasingly intense weather events. So I agree with you, Councillor.
Anyway, so thank you very much to the residents for coming tonight, and thank you also, I know it hasn't been easy for Thames Water and Ofwat for coming and answering our question.
Can
And
Thames
also
Water
all our-
provide a free post address to send this form back to, please? Do you have a free post address?
Okay, good night, and thank you, committee.